Okay. Dr. Vail, good morning.
Good morning.
Did you get a good night's sleep?
Very good night's sleep after a very good dinner.
I bet. Amazing. So we're back to DOCSF for the last day. It's a half day. It's an amazing day. Here's the work for this morning. How'd you like yesterday, by the way?
Yesterday was great, and today is going to be more of the same.
More of the same.
Really looking forward to diving into what's up on the agenda here. What could possibly go wrong? When I was driving in this morning, listening to the radio, they had Ashton Kutcher.
Oh, yeah.
Who's starting, co-founding an AI company, talking about what could possibly go wrong, and says all these very intelligent people are saying we need regulation. So I'll be interested to hear what's that all about, what could possibly go wrong, and what can go really right.
What could get really right? I like that positive spin, Tad. We're going to physical AI. This whole session in the morning really is about some of the more futuristic, forward-thinking part of DOCSF this year. Going to DOCSF science, value-based care, and I am also very, very excited to bring regenerative medicine back to DOCSF. I know it's near and dear to your heart, Tad. You've been a leader in a lot of this biotech stuff, and it's this group of speakers are really going to open your eyes of what's after decades of work is coming down the pike. Then we'll do some closing remarks, sum up the day, and start thinking about next year.
Yeah,
all right?
Absolutely.
All right, great. With that, thank you, Tad. I'll get started.
All right, let's do it.
So unfortunately, what could possibly go wrong, one of the things that went wrong is that our keynote got strep. He got strep throat, so he's actually not coming. But he sent us a video summarizing some of the ideas that he had, and Tom Peterson, our resident orthopedic AI specialist, has graciously agreed to come up on stage afterwards to talk with me about what we're about to hear on this video presentation. And Anna, is she here yet? I promised you yesterday that we would talk about integration layers, and we didn't. The reason was that Anna changed the topic largely because that space is blowing up, and she had come back from HIMSS and was unclear as to what the world of interoperability would look like because of the massive impact, apparently, that these large language models are going to have on the ability to interface between the electronic health record and all these point solutions that sit above it. I'm going to ask her when she comes down to come up on stage with me for 10 minutes and simply just talk about it, because I think it's important for those of us here to at least have a 10-minute insight to what's happening, then stay on top of it as time goes by. I may do a podcast on our program for you for that. Okay, so Louis Rosenberg is a brilliant Ph.D. scientist. He spoke at DOCSF last year, and last year I asked him to talk about augmented reality. He is either the founder or contemporaneous to the founders of the whole field of augmented reality. He built the first AR system for the Air Force in 1992, has stayed involved with AI and technology in general, and now has a company called Unanimous AI. And his thought process is that the only way that humans will be able to compete with these AGI models, is artificial general intelligence models that are potentially coming around, is if humans can connect their creativity and work together to solve the bigger problems that humanity will face. His vision is humans working together with connected minds. It sounds so futuristic, but these days it's actually not so futuristic. So let's listen to Louis.
Hi, I'm Louis Rosenberg, the founder and chief scientist of Unanimous AI, and today I'm going to talk about generative AI and the threat to human agency. So let me start with just a couple comments about generative AI. First, it is a genuine computing revolution. It will change society like the PC revolution, the internet revolution, the mobile phone revolution, and it will happen fast, much faster than prior transitions, not 5 to 10 years, more like 1 to 3 years. And it will have risks. Some are familiar risks, and some are unfamiliar risks. I will focus mostly on the unfamiliar risks because I think they're the most important to talk about. And they relate to this key fact that generative AI is not just about creating content. It will actually unleash a new form of media that is personalized, adaptive, and interactive. And regulators are not ready for this new form of media, which can be used as a dangerous form of targeted influence. So let's talk for a minute about the familiar risks. First is threat to jobs. Generative AI will create human competitive work products at a professional level, at scale. That's going to impact jobs. It's already impacting freelance artists, freelance writers, programmers, analysts, radiologists, oncologists. It's going to impact everybody. It's going to be a problem, but I think we will work through that problem. It's not the first time we've dealt with technologies threatening jobs. Then there's inaccuracy of content. Generative AI produces content that looks very authoritative, but it can be error-prone and biased. There are currently no standards or certifications for accuracy. Regulators and policymakers really need to put a process in place to certify accuracy. We will do that. I think that will get done. It's not a new problem. Then there's deliberate misinformation. Definitely not a new problem. Generative AI produces content that looks authentic, but it can be fake or misleading at massive scale. And we can be buried in fake media, papers, articles, and right now there's no watermarking process, and that's really what we need is a process where every piece of content generated by a large-scale AI system should have watermarking built into it so we can trace back where it was generated and know that it was not authentic, that it's computer-generated, not authentic content. And I think we'll deal with that. Then there's the unfamiliar risk. Generative AI is a new form of media that can threaten human agency. And my thesis is that unless regulated, generative AI could be the most dangerous technology for human manipulation that we've had to confront. And the reason is it enables targeted, customized, interactive, and adaptive influence at scale, aimed at individuals one by one. Before I describe that, I want to just make some definitions so it's clear what I'm talking about. When I say generative AI, I'm talking about large-scale AI systems that can create human competitive content at professional quality at scale. We normally think of those as documents, images, videos, music, computer code. But it also includes conversations. And in fact, conversations are maybe one of the most important pieces of content that gets created. It's so important that we often talk about conversational AI as a subset of generative AI. And I like to define it as artificial agents that can engage in flowing, coherent dialogue with human users while keeping track of the conversational context and the informational goals. This is not like, issuing a command to Siri. This is real conversations, which brings me to conversational agents, which will be the entities we interact with. Right now we think of these as chatbots that we type and they type back. These will soon transition to voice bots where we just talk in normal voice. And this will transition to virtual spokespeople where there's a face and persona that's displayed. And as you're talking to this virtual person, it's expressing facial expressions and it looks like a real person you're talking to. That's the path we're on, for sure. Because our future is conversational. We will speak naturally to our computers, not stiff commands, real conversations, and computers will speak naturally back to us, not stiff answers, but genuine back and forth with the AI asking for elaborations, clarifications, context, and in fact the AI will get to know you over time. It's collecting data as it's interacting with you. This is a new form of media, conversational media, that's interactive and adaptive form of information delivery that's individually targeted at users at a massive scale. When will we speak to our computers? All the time. We will have conversations with our search engines, with our digital assistants, with our productivity software, with websites, businesses, and services. We'll have a digital virtual spokesperson that you're interacting with, and you will have conversations with them. Throughout our digital lives, we will just talk to our computers. This will be powered by foundational models, large language models, from a handful of major corporations. And you might think, well, if we just regulate that small number of foundational models, or if they behave responsibly, we're good. We're not good because it will also be accessed through APIs by countless third parties who can influence the conversations through the API. And so you'll be interacting with a website, having a conversation, and you don't really know what the third party is doing through the API. And so without regulation, you won't know who you're talking to, and you won't know what their agenda is. Which brings me to the AI manipulation problem, which relates really to targeted, customized, interactive, AI-generated content. So let's say we have a generative AI system, and somebody, a third party, has an influence agenda, and they want to persuade somebody. What they can do is generate targeted influence on that user that's custom generated. Custom generated piece of content specifically for that user based on information you have about that user, their likes and wants and values. Create a piece of targeted influence, custom generated. That alone is dangerous, and we're going to be seeing that right away. But it gets more dangerous because these generative AI systems can then sense the user's reaction to that influence in real time. How does that user respond to that piece of influence that was just presented to them? Senses their reaction, and then it adapts its influence tactics in real time to increase the persuasive impact. Adapts its tactics, and you have this cycle that goes round and round where it imparts influence, senses reactions, adapts tactics, imparts influence, and so what you will have is in real time targeted persuasion optimized by AI. Now, I know this sounds abstract, but honestly, we humans just call this a conversation. After all, if you're a human salesperson and you want to influence somebody, what are you going to do? You're not going to hand them a document. That's not a great way to influence somebody. The best way to influence somebody if you're a human salesperson is you pitch them, you sense their reactions and reservations in real time, and then you adjust your tactics and you pitch them again. And you sense their reactions, and you adjust their tactics, and you adjust your pitch, and you go round and round and round, and you can be very, very persuasive. Generative AI can now do this, and it will be doing this. It will customize a pitch for you, a verbal pitch, but it will be crafted based on your history and your likes and your wants and your background. It will customize a pitch for you. It will adapt to your reactions. At first, your reactions might just be what did you type back? But soon your reaction will be what do you say back, including your vocal inflections. It will sense your emotions and your vocal inflections. And eventually, when you're looking at a real video chat with an AI, it will be looking at your facial expressions as well. And so it will adapt to your reactions. And it will then adjust its arguments. It will make very convincing arguments because it has access to the full world of information. And it will also learn what works on you over time. Not just the tactics that work on you, but the style. So these conversational AI systems will be more skilled than any human salesperson. So why is generative AI dangerous? Well, it will enable targeted, customized, interactive, and adaptive influence at scale. There will be personalized advertisements that are just custom images and videos that are designed specifically to be persuasive to you. And that's dangerous, and already Google, Microsoft, Meta have already announced that they're going to be using generative AI to create custom advertisements, potentially images and videos, that target people based on their very personal, specific parameters. But that's just the very first step. The real issue is that you will be able to then do this interactively and adapt in real time. And so conversational media is the easiest way to do that, where conversational media will be able to basically talk you into influence objectives. And it won't just be advertisements. It will be personalized propaganda, misinformation, disinformation that can talk you into different beliefs. If a third party wants to talk you into believing that vaccines are bad, it can make very, very convincing arguments, read your reactions, adjust to your reservations, adjust. That is a much more dangerous piece of influence tactic than just handing you a piece of content. And so we're talking about AI optimized persuasion. and it's extremely dangerous. It will optimize what it says to you. It will hone in on the most effective arguments for you. It will optimize how it says it to you. It will adjust its style, tone, tactics to best influence you. It will optimize who says it. Even the voice and persona, especially when it's visual, the age, gender, race, look, will be optimized for you over time. It will learn what types of personas are most influential on you. And so generative AI could be the most powerful technology for persuasion that we've faced. And this is asymmetric influence. And this is a really important point, because you could say, well, like human salespeople already can do this, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that we humans are at extreme disadvantage when we're talking to a conversational AI. First of all, there's a familiarity asymmetry. The AI will know your interests, your values, your education, your income, your political affiliation, your favorite teams, favorite movies. You will know nothing about the AI that you're talking to, much less than you would know just by reading a human salesperson. There's reaction asymmetry. The AI will be able to read you from your real-time reactions, your words, but ultimately your vocal inflections, facial expressions, posture. You will read nothing into the entity you're talking to. Black box. There's continuity asymmetry. The AI will model you over time. It will learn how you act and react over time. You will learn nothing about this entity you're talking to, because it will have a new agenda every time. There's an information asymmetry. This AI will have access to infinite information to make persuasive points to you. You will be overpowered. You can't judge if this AI is cherry-picking obscure facts or not, because it has access to the whole world of information, and you're just a human. There's a strategic asymmetry. The AI could be trained on human psychology, cognitive biases, negotiation tactics, sales tactics. You're outsmarted. You're outmatched. No human salesperson could have these skills. And then there's intentional asymmetry. When you're engaged with a human salesperson, you generally know what their intentions are to sell you a product or service. You won't know the agenda of your search engine. You could stumble on a certain website, engage with it, have a conversational interaction, and you might not realize that its real goal is not to give you the sports information that you want, but to deliver subtle messaging through conversation. And so what do we do about it? Well, we need to educate policymakers and regulators. First, they need to understand generative AI enables new forms of targeted influence. It's not just traditional influence generated at scale. They need to understand that generative AI, the influence agenda, could be subtle messaging. The user might not even notice that targeted persuasion was woven into a conversation. They need to understand that generative AI can learn what works on you personally. They will model your persuasiveness. And should that even be allowed? Should they be allowed to model your persuasiveness, to know what kind of tactics work best on you? So my recommendation is that all forms of targeted generative influence should be highly regulated, but especially if it's interactive and adaptive. For example, conversational influence should be very highly regulated, and it's very easy to deploy in dangerous ways. So again, I'm Louis Rosenberg. Feel free to contact me at louis@unanimous.ai. And if you want more information about this particular topic, I've written a recent paper called The Manipulation Problem, Generative AI and the Threat to Epistemic Agency, that you can also find online. Thanks.
Tom, thanks for joining me up here. I want to define something. I want to define agency, because I think the whole talk on agency is clear, and it's the capacity for human beings to make choices and impose those choices on the world around them. And what the argument that Louis is making is that this technology, this AI, will impact our ability to do that. How do you respond to that?
There were a lot of really good points raised, and I absolutely agree that AI can influence you into doing things. How does this relate to orthopedic surgery? I mean, obviously it has a lot of impact in the world, but if you want to, say, influence your patients into taking some medication or perhaps seeking the care that they need, this might be a tool that could possibly happen in the future where you have their medical record, you have information about them, and you can personalize a care strategy for them that they're more likely to actually take.
So, and this is the point Dr. Vail made just as we got on stage this morning, which is these technologies have a bright side and a dark side. There's the white hats and the black hats, which is the terminology that we use in cybersecurity. And a lot of folks are now just a little concerned about the dark side of this. The upside, we heard about the opportunity for conversational AI to be great chatbots yesterday from Memorial Health. They're already looking into using that to decrease the burden on our staff, right? Answer the right questions. And on the back end, gosh, you imagine going to a dealership to buy a car, and they know how much money you make, they know how many accidents you got into, they know how fast you've got no negotiating power whatsoever. Just I was thinking about that as an example. It's this asymmetry sounds very concerning. How do you think, what will happen to people? Where will they look for information? Because at some point, when you can't trust anything, it gets very disorienting.
Yeah, the future is going to be very weird. A lot of people, I imagine, are going to rely more on trusted sources. So, you've seen that this particular source is correct most of the time, and you might go back to them and use them as maybe a myriad of sources that you're trying to get. Because sometimes the information that you're pulling or that you're finding isn't going to be correct. And this is only going to get compounded with these new GPT or BERT chatbot models. As they become more and more powerful, hopefully they won't be giving us as much misinformation or disinformation or the other things that were listed here. But it's not quite certain.
Yeah. So interesting, because you're not pushing back. You agree with what he's saying. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I've yet to hear anybody who is familiar with the space actually push back on the statements made here. And what I love about this presentation was that he didn't put a qualitative aspect to it. This is just presenting facts. It isn't good, it isn't bad, it just is. And it's important that we learn how to think about it. And he also said it was going to be a 1 to 2, maybe 3-year time frame before everything changes. It's not a 10-year time frame. Do you agree with that?
I think that we're going to see major disruptions in this space within this year. Last year when I was asked what things are going to be like in 10 years, I said, no one's going to know. And look at us now. ChatGPT came, and we're all talking about it here today. This technology is only going to get more and more sophisticated.
For those of you who don't know, last year DOCSF was set in 2037. We decided to have the whole conference. You walk in the door, you're 25 years ahead, what's the world look like? And I encourage you to go look at those podcasts, they're amazing. And even that group of people weren't really picturing the changes that have happened in the past 12 months. You preface this by saying, I'm not sure what this has to do with orthopedics. It has everything to do with orthopedics. This is the purpose of DOCSF, is to tell you that we do not live in a bubble that's exempt from the rest of the planet's growth and moving forward. We are average age, probably a little over 40 here. Who was sitting at breakfast with me? The young lady to my right. Is she here? Oh, it's too bad. I don't know, she's very young. She has fully integrated ChatGPT into her workflows. All her customer conversations go through ChatGPT. She has several apps open at the same time that pulls data so that when she has to reference a surgeon, in 2 or 3 clicks, she can answer all the emails. She's switched all the way over to Edge because Chrome wasn't sufficiently integrated. And for her, it was of course. It was second nature, and I'm just keep thinking to myself, it is happening. It's happening quickly. It is not necessarily happening where you think it's happening in the halls of power. In fact, the halls of power, just by their age, are almost insulated from it. They almost don't get it. And ortho is going to be massively impacted by all this. I don't think we're going to escape it. And on the good side, the white hat side, the ability to predict motion, to predict what we're going to be doing. The diagnostics piece, we're going to go into it later today. But I don't think we'll be insulated. What do you think?
Well, definitely won't be insulated. There will be white hat and black hat events happening in your lifetime. I'm also one of those nerds that use generative AI, ChatGPT, and others to answer my emails. Sorry, all my collaborators in the room. That was automated. I've done a fun thing here today where I've asked ChatGPT to give me a few bullet points about generative AI and how it can impact orthopedic surgery.
Great. What you got?
It could assist with pre-operative planning. We've talked a lot about that, managing patient care and maybe even some predictive models. It can improve implant design, enhance surgical accuracy, and might enable personalized rehabilitation plans. So notice that it didn't tell you the downsides.
Yeah.
So again, you really need to be checking these things because sometimes they might be hallucinating or giving mis or disinformation. And the problem isn't going to go away, and that's why I think that people are always going to need to be in the loop, called a human in the loop. In this case, experts, surgical experts who can guide these software and really know when it goes wrong. But that being said, there's a huge opportunity here because we presented yesterday the diagnostic accuracy of GPT versus clinicians. It's not quite good enough yet, but it might get there one day. And these tools are very cheap. They can be deployed in places that don't have adequate healthcare, but you might again run the risk of having bad information in there, and you would need someone who's an expert in the loop. But maybe it'll be able to help you improve those things that we just talked about, and also be able to improve your reach, the amount of people that you can help.
Gosh, so many things came through my mind as you were talking about this technology. So it was said yesterday that AI, this form of AI, is a mirror of humanity. It is simply a concentration of all that's on the web, and that's it. And that's nice, but it's not the end of it. That's the beginning. That was the initial concept. So I want to share with you a little bit because we did hear Sam Altman speak recently and why he released ChatGPT-3 when he did. And there was a lot of pressure on him not to do that. And it was a very interesting argument. He said, look, here's the deal. All AI is only as good as the data that's trained on. And it reflects the data it's trained on. Would you rather have a super well-informed AI being released into the world where the person is controlling the data stream that informed that AI is a government, maybe not a friendly government, or a large corporation with a very specific intent, or do we want the beginnings of this, the intelligence of this software to reflect a broader base? And I think that his ideas are, look, let's just release it, let's get everybody on board, because the questions that we ask are what creates the links within the system to inform its intelligence, correct? So by having the general humanity, the world, the planet, inform it, it becomes representative of the people, as opposed to a corporate or a government. Do you agree with that?
Yes. I think in the future we're going to have these AI tools that are built by, say, governments or corporations, people on the internet. There's going to be one for every different thing you want to ask it. Some of them are not going to have the kinds of rules or regulations that we're talking about here. I think that watermarks are a great idea for generative AI video and images, but honestly, because some person can make it on their home laptop, you're not always going to have that. It's just not going to happen. But yeah, there are all kinds of different ways that these things can be made, and they're going to be ubiquitous in the future.
So I suspect that DOCSF23 will speak mostly to this topic. So thank you very much for joining me, and I really appreciate you helping us think through this.
Great.
Thank you. As I mentioned, this morning is about looking outside of orthopedics, about looking at the big picture of what's happening around us, some of the driving technologies that will shape our future. It's one of the things that I think DOCSF does well. There are occasionally moments in your life that change what you do. And I went to TED. I was just sort of getting inspired. A lot of what we do here is inspired by TED a few years ago. And I was starting to do my research using sensors that I mentioned earlier. and I got a small grant from the department. And we started looking at using wearable sensors to track motion. And I was very unhappy with the results. I thought we'd finally cracked it. And the data just wasn't there, and nobody's published very good data with these results. And I went and heard Dr. Poupyrev speak. And I sat there and I'm like, oh my God, that is such a different way of thinking. That is such a brilliant way of thinking, that it changed the way I thought about what the potential for sensors were. So it took me about 6 months, literally 6 months, to track all my friends through Google, to see if I could get Dr. Poupyrev to talk to me. It was great. So we had this conversation, and I said, look, this is what I'm doing, and it's not working. He goes, well, of course it's not working. You're doing it wrong. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing it wrong. He says, yes, you're doing it wrong. And yesterday I showed you, or Wednesday I showed you the amazing result that his team was able to do when he did it correctly. And we're so happy to establish a relationship between Google and UCSF. And for 2 years, we spent time looking at how to use sensors to define human motion. Since then, Dr. Poupyrev has left Google to start his own company, and it's in the space of physical AI. And I just can't do it justice. So I thought I'd ask Dr. Poupyrev to take some time to speak to us about this new aspect of these foundational models that we haven't really seen yet. We've seen large language models. We've seen generative AI that's mostly image-based. But Dr. Poupyrev was going to tell us a little bit about how we're going to sense the world around us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello? Yeah. So my name is Ivan. Thank you, Stefano, for introducing me and telling this story, how we met. I am, right now, as Stefano mentioned, I was at Google, and I feel much more positive about artificial intelligence than the speaker before. In fact, I feel so positive I quit Google and convinced a lot of my team to quit with me to start this new company called Archetype AI. We've been around only for 1 month. And we're getting up to speed with that work. And I would like to talk about what kind of things we're trying to build and why we feel positive about impact artificial intelligence would have on our everyday life. So I'll do a kind of obligatory slide about ChatGPT that I think is I have a much more friendly outlook. I used to live in Japan, and in Japan, when you read cartoons about the robots, they're all kind of friendly and cuddly, and Astro Boy, that helps you, and wants to feel love and all that stuff. So I kind of see this sort of view of technology which can help us. It can be our assistant that can support us and can be our friend. However, the problem is with ChatGPT, and this is something we who work in the physical space know for a long time. People who build a real-time working system with the sensors, and before joining Google, I worked in Disney World, actually, not Disneyland, and building all these attractions, is that the LLMs and other models and generative AI, which is trained on the web data, is very, of course, impressive and can do a lot of cool stuff. But there's certain class of questions and certain class of inquiries which is impossible to answer. It has no answers about your local context. It doesn't know how many people in the room, what we're doing, who pays attention, who is checking email. We don't know who is leaving, who is still there. I cannot ask if my wife is still at home, if my son did his homework. The person who runs the store would not be able to ask what was the most popular product, was there any accident, what time did they shut down, should I shut down the store because nobody's coming, and so forth. Today's models have no context about the local world. They're very generalist. They can write you poetry, they can tell you about Napoleonic wars, but they cannot answer very basic questions about your life, which is actually important to you. Because what we care about, even if we care about things happening everywhere in the world, what happens to us now, what is important. So our company is on a mission to build a new kind of model. We are a foundational model company, and we're building a foundation model which will understand physical world. We call it, like, the easiest way to understand it is think about like GPT-4, but for the physical world, which understand what happens in reality and help you through your daily life. I'm going to talk on a very, very high level. I'm not going to go into detail how it's going to work, but just general idea. And the basic idea is to build this model, which is going to be built on the same architectures which have been used to build LLMs, which transform-made models and neural networks, where you can fuse information from the web, information which you collected from the web in LLMs, which gives you general model of the world, both real and imaginary, with the real-time sensing data coming from devices around you, either through instrumented environment, which can be done in controlled environments such as businesses, but also some of the home, but also devices you already have there. Of course, you should own this data. Of course, this has to be your data, and combined together, you should be able to interact with this model in the same way you interact with a web. So, that's the next slide. And if you think about and you should be able to basically use one merged representation of real world and the context taken from the web, the conceptual model of the world, and use the same techniques you used for using the web. You should be able to index it, a physical world by yourself. Something, for example, Google Maps does, but you should be able to do for your home or for your businesses. You should be able to query or search it, predict, simulate, and optimize. This is you should do. So once you have a simulator, you can optimize your future, what you want to achieve, and then automate to achieve results you actually care about. So everything should be done using the same interface, which could be a search engine or the natural interface or gestures or any sort of information. So, and if you can do this, then fundamentally you can treat the world and treat the physical reality as a software. And you don't think about anymore if this is physical world or this is digital world. It's going to become one thing combined, right? And you should be able to treat it, as I mentioned, the world becomes like a part of the web and everything is merged together. And this sort of high-level vision we pursuing. Now, this is a big vision. The world is a big place. We're not trying to replace the entire world right away. So we start focusing on the very narrow aspect of what we're looking at. We want to understand some of the aspects of behavioral cues, how people behave in the world, right? And we look at the very, very simple things, such as awareness, where people are, engagement, what people are interested in, and action, what people could do in the world. This is like very basic grammar of our interacting with the physical reality. And our thesis is that if you can be able to do this reliably at scale with, of course, providing all the safeguards for the personal data and the privacy and all the important issues like that, you'll be able to solve a lot of problems which are not solved today. And I will tell you why it's not solved today. But, working at Google, you have a privilege to talk to a lot of companies around the world, internationally, not just, in North America, but all over the place. And working in companies, I saw how much challenges and difficulties those companies have. And we saw that, they came to us because we're working just like Dr. Bini came to us with his problem, and there is no tools for him to solve this problem, to understand motion in more details. We have automotive companies coming saying, look, 80% of crashes and a lot of deaths happen because people don't pay attention. So can we stop distractions? Big property management came and said 60% of the real estate space is not used. So we're just wasting gigantic amount of energy on heating and cooling places where nobody's there. It's just gigantic amount of money and energy we spend there, and CO2 and all of that. You go to the stores and have no idea what product is successful and what people are interested in, what want to buy. So people. 97% of the people who come to the store leave empty-handed because they couldn't find what they wanted and just not happy, right? So how can we optimize that? Security, I talked to a lot of security companies and saying if you just know in a house when there is a fire, is the grandma still back in the room or she is out? Just doing that, you can save not just life of the grandma, but first responders who come in there, go through a burning house to save it. And by the way, you can also reduce the cost of the insurance, which you have to pay for the house. I'm not even talking about accidents and injuries. A company, Syntas, who is the biggest producer of the rental clothing uniforms for the businesses, was saying that I don't know exactly numbers, I need to remember, but $60 billion is paid for the worker comps because of people work unsafely. They're doing dangerous motions. They build long-term injuries with the knees, which Dr. Bini then have to fix after this. And also and so forth, right? So if we can add simple technology which prevents people from doing unsafe motions, we can decrease the amount of money people in compensations and have healthy people. And it can go on and on and on. When I was working at Disney, I was working at Sony, our devices became so complicated, right? So it just became hard and hard to use them. They have many devices in the world. In life, we have 50,000 remote controls. That's a cost in materials people using to build technology. And just like it's releases going on, right? And the question was like, why it's never been solved before? Like, do we need large models to solve this problem? And the answer is yes, you need. Because you couldn't solve it before without the previous techniques. Because in order to build solutions for any one of those problems, the economy of building those products, and I've built those products before many times, both at Sony, at Disney, and at Google, the economy of building this product just doesn't support it. If you think about building hardware, building software, manufacturing, reliability testing, compliance, and then building application approval, privacy data, the back end, and then updating, maintaining software over the time. As, I don't know, one of those companies, Apple, changes Bluetooth standard and all the devices stop working, I have to go back and redo the software. It's just the economy of using this scale would not support any of those use cases. Or oppositely, none of these use cases will allow you to build a dedicated device unless you're willing to pay $2,000 per one sensor, which nobody's willing to. It's just not supportive. So the only solution to address all this long tail of problems people have, and with a lot of problems, which cumulatively in a long tail, wasting gigantic amount of money and energy and resources, is to build one model which can solve them all. And that's our solution. So once you build the one model which solves them all, and then you can, then with incremental, relatively small incremental cost of adapting this model for a particular use case, which can be very, very small, you should be able to deploy and address all this problem and really make significant impact on the physical world and make it better, more safer, more economical, cut CO2, cut the environment, and so on and so forth. And that's our vision, right? So these are, pretty much the slide explained it. And just like for example, what can you do with this stuff? You can make all your devices in your hospital, in your home, work together as one thing to understand and react. You don't need to control one by one, but as you go through the room, it understands where you are, turns off TV, turns on air conditioning, turns on security system, stop the robot when you're watching TV, and so forth. One integrated system working together. We're actually working with companies like Samsung and Infineon to bring it to the reality. In the large spaces, businesses, which are, I'm not a doctor, but I'm assuming hospital could be one of them. Understanding how a business space is utilized, where people are going, where they're spending time, are they concentrating in one place? Do you need this room? Can they reuse it for something else? Understanding where people are paying attention naturally and making sure that information's importance goes there and not where you think it should be going. Accident prevention, somebody stealing or somebody falling down or there's something happen and be able to report and kind of, that this is all possible, should be possible with a single model. And of course, what's really exciting is when you combine those capabilities of real-time monitoring, real-time sensing with general data, but also personalized data of the patient and be able to give you real-time answer, give you like a super doctor which can talk to you and explain you what you should be doing or not should be doing. That's also kind of very exciting. So this is kind of like high-level vision what we're trying to accomplish, and that very, very excites me. I'm very positive about the future of AI in solving real-world problems. And just maybe some food for thought, right? I'm not working in the healthcare business, but just what I see from the TV, these are some of the ideas I have. Can AI, real physical AI, provide you real-time support during surgery? As you're doing surgery, the information being reported, not all information is given to you, but only most relevant information based on what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. Can it look after patients? Can we have support, nursing staff in the great shortage? Can we improve quality of care by augmenting nurse with a virtual assistant nurse, right? Can we make interaction with medical devices easier? I mean, this is one of the most complicated pieces of equipment. Can it help patients to recover after surgery and generally treat chronic conditions, guide them through and remind them and be kind of a coach to recover and live healthier lives? Can it run medical trials for you? which is really expensive, as I understand, and one of the conversations there. And can we like build this kind of like this super doctor, which can answer any questions about you and be helpful at any time, and dramatically reduce cost of access to the high quality professional medical care. So this is sort of food for thought, and we would love to talk to you more, like to hear you more, because we're just at the beginning of our journey, and we are happy to engage with you and see if something can be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure you guys realize what a rock star Ivan is in his world. It's like having, I don't know, Miley Cyrus come to visit us for a few hours, so thank you so much. It was really extraordinary perception. It's a whole new world of application for AI. I don't think anybody else is doing this other than yourself. No. Yeah. However, after the talk before, and you had this very positive outlook,
right.
I think in everybody's mind is, where do you think it's going with this whole AI thing? Are we going to be the world run by robots anytime soon, or do you have a much more positive outlook? Because you've been working in this space for so long.
Yeah, so well, it's a complex question that really, it's kind of like, like black hole, you can disappear. I think that first of all, yes, I'm working in this space for long, so I'm very cautious about predictions of how technology is going to unfold, because in my past, I used to work in virtual reality in the 90s, when it was the first time virtual reality. And the talk we saw before, you pretty much could see the same work in the 90s. The virtual reality is going to come, and people are going to turn into zombies, and everybody's going to wear the helmet, and they're going to talk to each other, and it's going to be horrible. And there was a listening Congress about gaming, if you remember, in the 90s, and how gaming corrupts the youth, and everybody kills each other because of the gaming. Gaming is the problem, right? So I think there is a very natural, and it's human tendency to fear the unknown, right? So, and I think the real impact of AI on their life is fundamentally, I think, still unknown. And I think it's important that, as I mentioned before, when I was living in Japan, I lived in Japan for 15 years, the outlook on artificial intelligence there is quite different. And I think there's two dangers there, right? One danger is, as any technology, if it's not carefully used, it makes mistake. And Chernobyl blew up without artificial intelligence, as you know. So this mistake can indeed have difficult consequences. But at the same time, the other danger is not using AI and falling behind. Because you can see in the history of civilizations, cultures which tend to go kind of closed and stop progress, they end up being relevant. So I think it's a very careful balance, not to scare yourself too much, that you stop progress and try to kind of like freeze yourself in this stage while everybody else is actually moving full speed. Because as I mentioned through examples, when it's done right and done carefully and done with a sense for the real problems you're trying to solve, AI, I think, can be dramatic amplification for the humans and dramatic amplifications of what we can do and really take us to the next level and help us in dramatic ways. So I think that's the angle I'm thinking about AI.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was, I could not have scripted that better. We got both perspectives on the potential for AI, and I'm really glad we got a chance to see it. Large behavioral models, you heard them first here. Moving on to another absolute leader in our space, an pediatric orthopedic surgeon who had a vision, came from the gaming world, was a rock star in the gaming world. Little do you know about Justin. He went on to found a company that's done extremely well, has been leading the way in orthopedics with the implementation of virtual reality. Dr. Justin Barad, will you please join us up on stage and tell us about where we're going next? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. How are we doing? Hey, can you guys hear me okay? All right. Well, let's enjoy this presentation before the robots take over the world. And I got great news for you. We do have some AI in the presentation, so we're keeping the theme consistent. I know many of you, but for those that don't know me, my name's Justin. Hi. Like Stefano said, my background is in video game development. I got interested in healthcare as a family member got sick, and I was like, hey, maybe there's a way to use software and technology, not for entertainment, but to help people. So I studied bioengineering in college, and I wanted to invent new healthcare technology, but I didn't know how to get started. And a mentor told me, if you want to invent something, you really need to understand the problem you're trying to solve first. And he thought that one of the best ways to understand medical problems was to be a doctor. So he helped me get into medical school, and then I, at UCLA, pursued orthopedic surgery. That's where I experienced firsthand one of the biggest problems in healthcare today, which is how we train and assess our surgeons and proceduralists. And I was able to combine my two life passions of video games and healthcare and start Osso in October 2016. So what we'll be talking about today is an overview of the problem we're trying to solve, a little bit about the technology, showing you some cool stuff we're working on. We'll go over our latest clinical research, and then we'll talk a little bit how we think VR should be implemented both in residency, beyond, and in the ambulatory surgical center setting. So I think one of the first problems is that there's simply too much to learn. So if you think about it, we're almost victims of our own success. Accelerating science and technology, and certainly with generative AI, I can't imagine this can make this any better. The number of procedures we're needing to know how to do, sometimes on demand, is spreading exponentially. So it's like we've gone from French Laundry to Cheesecake Factory. You just can't do everything well. I always tell a fun story. I don't know about for the other surgeons out there, if you've had a similar experience, maybe you can tell me if this is normal, but we were just eating lunch, minding our own business, when we were called by the LA Zoo to operate on a gorilla with about 2 hours of heads up. And we're like, you know, we're human doctors, right? And they're like, yes, but you have to come. So we Googled if gorillas have bones. They do. It's very similar to ours, and Jabari did great. But it feels like more and more we're dealing with gorilla-like situations every day, maybe a procedure we've never done before or only do very rarely. Number two is modern surgery is actually quite complicated. So robotics, minimally invasive surgery, a lot of things we're talking about here actually tend to have longer learning curves, often 50 to 100 cases. Finally, we really lack a way to assess technical skill in surgery. I don't know about you guys, but in my own career, the one time I was really formally evaluated, I was asked to play the board game Operation and remove a few plastic pieces without buzzing, which I did, and I'm still proud of that, but we can do better. So I got involved in VR very early and immediately saw its utility to solve this problem. You use it anytime, anywhere. You can train in a hands-on way with cutaneous haptic feedback. You can train as a team or train remotely, and you can get objective assessment for one of the first times. So I want to show you some of the technology in action. So this is our technology at Academy a couple years ago, but it gives you an idea sort of how easy it is to use. So we're using off-the-shelf VR hardware. So right now this is mainly MetaQuest 2, MetaQuest Pro. The MetaQuest 2 right now goes for about $350. It does not require a computer or a laptop. It's just a headset and two controllers. And in fact, you can also just put the controllers down and just use your hands. You do lose the cutaneous haptics, but it works really well. You can see that you can train with multiple people from anywhere in the world. I was actually just in Brazil training with someone from Philadelphia. So we had one of our team members come in to train a bunch of Brazilian surgeons. And you can see here the level of engagement and excitement. And I always say what we do in surgery is serious work, but it's also a lot of fun. So training to do it should be fun too. Something that we really focus on at Osso is, one is visual fidelity, which I'll show you more of a bit, but also real-time imaging simulation. So obviously this is not orthopedics, but I just want to show you an example. So on the right side, you're seeing a real-life TAVR or transcatheter aortic valve replacement procedure. On the left side, you're seeing that same imaging simulation in a $350 standalone VR headset. So as you can see, it's very difficult to tell the difference between the two, but in one of these images, you're not being exposed to radiation, and you can practice anytime and anywhere, which is really nice, and don't have to wear lead. So I talked a little bit about visual fidelity. This is one of the calling cards of Osso VR. We want our imaging to be clinically accurate. It's also very hard to get high fidelity visuals to run on these low powered VR headsets which use mobile phone processors. So we put together an art studio with people from Disney, Lucasfilm, Industrial Light and Magic to create an experience that is both inspiring but also clinically accurate. So speaking of generative AI, this is a partially AI-generated image. We showed this to some potential partners, and they're like, why are you showing us a photo of a lady? And we're like, oh, actually, this is a VR model. So you can see that the technology is becoming quite sophisticated, and AI is really accelerating our ability to create this clinically accurate and jaw-dropping imagery. Hold on, definitely want you guys to see this one, in case you weren't horrified enough today. Actually, I saw a cadaver dissection of the face the other day, and like even as a surgeon, I'm like, ooh. Even surgeons have something that get to them. So we talk a lot about training and fidelity, simulation. I think there are two things that we don't talk about enough when it comes to VR and immersive simulation. One is assessment. It's not just about the training, it's about measuring your proficiency. And the other one is the ability to train together, what we call collaborative training. This is a game changer. So people are like, well, why don't you do this on a phone or a laptop? The difference is that you can do this with other people anywhere in the world. So in this example, one of our employees is in Portland, Oregon, and the other one is in Memphis, Tennessee. But here they are in the same operating room, running around, picking up instruments, and just running through a procedure a lot like you do in real life. You can really do this from any time, anywhere. Often I'll be called to jump into an emergency training session. I'll pull over on the side of the road, connect to my mobile hotspot, and jump into one of these sessions. So really enables you to do much more in terms of a team training and remote coaching perspective. So typically when I'm going through this with people, people are like, this looks amazing, this is incredible, but does it work? Which is really interesting because I often ask, well, how do you know what we're doing now works? Because we don't really have a lot of data on how education works today. That being said, we have about 7 peer-reviewed studies that we'll go through real quick. And so this is a study done at UCLA where you're seeing 2 trainees. On the right side, you see an individual who is trained with Osso VR to his set level of proficiency, which we can measure. It's my old program director. I never got that handshake. I'm not bitter. And if you look on the left side, that's a little piece of paper. That's a cheat sheet. You can check if you don't remember what to do next. This guy came into the room when he felt ready to do the procedure. He's like, I'm confident, I'm ready to go. He checks this piece of paper 26 times, while the individual on the right checks it 0 times. And the take-home point that I'd like you to all to leave with is that how we feel and what reality is can be startlingly different. And the vast majority of our world of surgery right now is on the left side. It's, I feel ready to do this surgery, or I feel that this person, my colleague, is ready to go. But there's really no objective, repeatable checkpoint. So in this study published in the Journal of Surgical Education, when we measured the performance using a scale called OSATs, which is 1 to 5 in a variety of categories, the VR train and assess group performed 10 points better than the non-VR group. This is a study published in Core. This looked at the ability to complete a procedure without needing supervision. So in a traditionally trained group, about 25% of that cohort could complete a procedure without someone needing to step in and intervene. When using Osso VR, that went up to 78%. And I think what's really interesting in this study is that they used adult learning, which means spaced repetition, for their VR training. And when I read the study, I was like, oh my God, like I've never even heard of this concept. You know, we all were trained on see one, do one, teach one, and this idea of being able to train repeatedly over a period of time before you actually go into the operating room is a relatively new concept for us. And something that now this technology enables and makes a bit easier. This is a study in arthroplasty. This is fixed bearing unicondylar joint replacement. Very similar. This is done at Community Hospital in Ventura. Performance score went up by 6 points. Procedure time went down by 10 minutes. Redirections went from 9 to 3 or down by 60%. And the training time was also lower. This is a concept called the transfer efficiency ratio. This is an idea that, hey, if I train in VR, I get more skill per minute or per second than if I were reading a book or watching a video, which is very exciting because we like high yield, right? This is comparing VR to a video. Long story short, VR was better, more accurate, and also faster. This is a very interesting study done by AO Trauma. This was done in Brazil and Latin America and 120 traumatologists. This is actually an integrated VR, so it's partial sawbones, partial VR, same day, and 93% of the attendees wanted to train that way going forward. We often get questions, well, what about haptic feedback? What about force feedback? I give entire talks on this. I'll just say, yes, we do have haptic feedback in the form of cutaneous haptics, which is available in these controllers. Most people are referring to something called kinesthetic force feedback. So the idea is like, if I'm pushing on a wall in a virtual simulation, if something is physically stopping your hand, that's kinesthetic haptic feedback. Whereas rumble, what we all have in our phones, that's cutaneous haptics. There's actually a lot of research in the robotic literature that shows that cutaneous haptics, for whatever reason, seems to work much better. But we wanted to understand that too. So we did a study with Johns Hopkins where they took a fully physical model. So this was a sawbone, soft tissue envelope, real surgical instruments, real fluoro for a skiffy pinning, comparing it to training in Osso. What they found was that there was no significant difference between the two modalities, which is very interesting. That being said, we don't recommend this for fully replacing hands-on training, just repositioning hands-on training in the learning journey, which I'll show you shortly. And there's also a lot of cool things happening in the haptic world going forward. Some people are like, well, what's happening in the headset? Is it a video game, or are you just sort of like hitting buttons? So this is a study done in a pitching lab at Wake Forest. On the left side, you're seeing a sawbone simulation with motion trackers on a resident. And on the right side, you're seeing the same procedure, but in Osso VR. What we then looked at was 64 different motion variables, and 63 of those variables were statistically identical between the two groups, which is simply wild to me, and it's only getting better. So the last thing I'll talk about is the critical nature of portability. So you can have the best simulator in the world. It's 100% realistic. You fully replace the real thing. But if nobody uses it, literally provides zero value, right? So this is a study that was performed at CU and Penn. And this looked at the usage of simulation labs in cardiac residents. So 30 of these residents had access to simulation. And in a single year, 1 out of 30 residents reported that they used the simulation lab, which is wild. So it really is critical to me, I think, and based on the data, that you have a simulator that you can bring with you. You're sitting at home, you're in between cases, you just jump in and train, and this is how we should be doing it going forward, a lot like we carried Hoppenfeld around with us. These headsets are lighter and cheaper than our textbooks, which is pretty wild. We talked a little bit about objective assessment, just showing you what that looks like here. So in this run through, you can see your time versus a recommended goal time, which is the dotted yellow line. You can see steps that you forgot and also steps that you didn't perform to clinical satisfaction, as well as a proficiency rating, which is milestone based. So we all start from the same place, and you can only get better. You don't want to be taking experienced surgeons and telling them they're a C- surgeon. It doesn't go well. Take my word for it. So in terms of the traditional education journey, you're often maybe seeing a technique at a conference, reading about a book, maybe you do a cadaver lab, and then you're going straight to a patient, which you're very early on the learning curve. Maybe that case doesn't go very well. If it's a new product, you're likely not to adopt. Or if it's a technique, you're just going to grind through patients until you reach proficiency, which we've seen that as well. So this is the idea behind a VR-enabled digital education journey. The idea is that you start off with VR self-study. So if you're in an ambulatory surgical center, you're integrating robotics, you're doing a procedure you haven't done in a while, you have a new team of travelers or a new PA, new NP, you can run someone through a curriculum before they come in the operating room. This could be same day, could be a couple of days, could be a couple of weeks. And you just have 3 days where you do specific VR sessions with graduating levels of performance. Then ideally you want to bring in some sort of remote coaching or team training session. This idea is that you want to train with the team or you want to bring in an expert. This not only helps you sort of get those final clinical tips, tricks, and pearls, but is also a great motivator, right? You want to look good in front of your teachers. So what we find is like when you bring in an instructor, an authority figure, people are going to train a lot to look good in VR in front of them. It's an interesting phenomenon, but we see it all the time. And then in some cases, we can replace hands-on training, but most often you're moving into a hands-on training portion. This could be sawbones, this could be just messing around with the instruments, seeing how they feel, or a cadaver lab. And what you've done is you've really turned this introductory sort of chaotic cadaver lab experience into a master class. This is a final exam. This is a dress rehearsal. You know exactly what to do. Now you're just putting it to the test and just understanding what bits and pieces you can't get from simulation. Now, if there's a gap between your training and inpatient care, you have an incredible refresh tool. And if your entire team gets replaced, because that's just the world we live in now, you can get everyone up to speed in VR before the case. So you're not running around the case trying to teach everybody while doing surgery at the same time, which we all know is very chaotic. And then now you've optimized yourself for the very best, smoothest case possible, all without really needing any physical instruments or anything like that. It's a pretty crazy world we live in now, and it's pretty exciting. So thank you so much for everybody here. You guys are all putting in the effort and time to understand technology and integrate it. I think in the years that we've been doing this, what I found is that you can have a technology that obviously works and that's supported by the data. But once again, if people don't use it and they don't integrate it, it doesn't do anything. And it's the change management, it's the integration and the comfort with this technology that is a much bigger challenge than the development of the technology itself. So it's people like you who are taking the time to understand it and to figure out how we can successfully integrate this technology that we know works that is going to move the ball for all of us and lead to a healthier, better world. So thank you all.
Thank you, Justin. Masterclass in virtual reality. Before you take off, leave us for a second. What's next? Where's in 10 years from now? Where are we in VR?
Well, I mean, obviously, generative AI is the talk of the town. So for us, this could change how we create the VR experiences. In the soft skill space in VR, where we do much more like what I like to call hardcore procedural training, but it's called hard skills. Having avatars that you can more easily converse with if you're in like a code scenario or something like that is something a lot of people are looking at. On the image generation side, you know, VR content is still relatively challenging to develop, requires a lot of expertise, and as we have found, and I showed you today, that is getting a lot faster and higher quality thanks to generative AI, and that is likely to improve over time as well. The latest sort of hype and word on the street is Apple is rumored to be releasing a VR AR headset. We don't really know yet, but that is only going to really, we believe, help and sort of renew interest in immersive technology, so that's something that we're all very excited about. And I think from my perspective, and something I was talking about a little bit, the input I think is very exciting of like how we use our hands in VR, and the ability to use your hands is very advanced now, and with recent software updates, so you can put the controllers down and just use your hands, and advancement in haptics as well. With the new Quest Pro controllers, if you haven't tried it, is actually quite remarkable in terms of the variety of things that you could simulate and the realism of the experience.
Thank you very much. Justin Barad.
Thank you.
Outstanding. So moving on to the next topic, you may have heard the term digital twins. It's a term that I misuse all the time. But Stephen Levine is the director of virtual human modeling at Dassault Systèmes, probably the first person in the world, I think, to create a digital twin of a heart. And in so doing, opened up the possibility of working virtually and testing concepts that apply to the real world through the digital twin concept. Dr. Levine, please join us on the DOCSF stage.
So what I'm going to talk about, as Stefan said, is something that we actually like to use the term virtual twin. We just saw a brilliant presentation on the use of virtual reality. The idea that really melding what's in our mind with the computer. So you can imagine what happens in our mind, all of our innovation, our learning all happens inside this virtual world that we create inside our heads, but you can't collaborate inside your head. And so this concept of the virtual twin is capturing not only what's in your head, but everything we know about it and bring it to life in what we call the virtual world, which is on the computer. And so let me start by introducing our company. You probably haven't heard of us. Dassault Systèmes is not a small company. We've been around for 4 decades, $6 billion software company. You probably haven't heard of us because you're not going to find us in the hospital or the ASCs. But if you design an implant or a surgical robot, no doubt you're using our tools for doing computer-aided design, computer-aided engineering. So we have a long-term legacy of actually helping to build better products. I'm here today because about 10 years ago, we decided to expand our purpose, which is really to help not just build great products or help companies to build great products, but actually to help build a better, more sustainable world, something we called harmonizing product, nature, and life. So build a better world, the people inside of it, bring our technologies, this virtual twin concept, to everything we do. And so that set us on a course to really understand, well, how do we go beyond products to the natural world? And so today I'm here because we are now trying to collect the knowledge it takes to actually bring those technologies into your world. And so one of the things we did, because we're an evidence-driven company, we've brought on board a company called Metadata. So we now have access to the world's largest clinical trial data set. More than 30,000 clinical trials we've run on our cloud-based system. So we have all this data. We collect about 500,000 medical images a year. So we have this incredible resource. We've heard a lot about training artificial intelligence. Well, our hope is to train it on this medical information, be very purposeful about it. We've had 9 million patients, and so we're using this information, kind of bringing it together with our core technology, which I'll kind of walk you through a little bit. So this is a kind of an easy to understand idea of what a virtual twin is. So this is a video made by one of our customers, an athletic sports company, and here you see the athlete on the left, the real athlete, and this virtual twin on the right. So by taking those sensors, so he's wearing this supportive athletic clothing, and the goal is to have the minimum amount of clothing in the areas where you need to provide relief to the muscles and support where you need the accurate. And so we can take the sensors, replicate the motion, and then use our physics engine to find out what's actually happening on that real twin. And then you can color code it so you can see what's happening, and then you can optimize the virtual version of the real. And then, of course, you can see what happens in the real world afterwards. So you can use it for design, monitoring, et cetera. So this is kind of our legacy, just so you kind of have a sense of where we come from, why we think we can be relevant in this space. So we started back in the 80s. You may remember, some of you may remember, computers in the 80s. Some of you were not born in the 80s. We were building planes on the computer back in those days. We were helping people to stop building out of wood and trying to fit it together so the wings fit with the fuselage, and let's see if we can create a digital copy. In those days, all we could do is do a part at a time and just how it looked. But over time, computers got better, and now we're able to actually model the entire process, how to build it, how to drive it, how to crash it. Planes, of course, we just heard about virtual reality and training in medical simulation. Well, as I'm sure you all know, in aerospace, a pilot doesn't train on the plane. He trains on a virtual reality version of the plane. But it doesn't just look like it. It behaves exactly like a plane. And that all comes from sensors. That is taking what happens in a real plane and putting it into the virtual twin. And that's how they train. And so, as I said, we mentioned we made this big leap, and about 2 years ago, we made a commitment, and Stefan mentioned that I've taken the lead within our company in bringing about this idea of saying, can we do the same for doctors? If we can give an engineer the ability to create the ideal machine, why can't we give a doctor the ability to create the ideal surgery, the ideal patient treatment? And so this is just sort of an example of what we do in the automotive space, and giving you a sense. We heard about virtual reality. Well, this is a virtual reality sort of version of a real car crash. That's not a real car. In fact, we all see virtual cars, or we all see crash dummies on TV. Well, it turns out that 99% of all the crashes are like this. They don't do real cars anymore. You can see how accurate it is. You can see the shock waves that go through the glass, propagating all the way to the roof of the car. This is not just looks like a car, it behaves completely like a car. And so companies now in the automotive space, in the aerospace, they build commercial versions of the cars, and then they actually crash them. And of course, you can do things like peel the skin away and see what happens inside, so the engineers can optimize what will happen, replicating the real world situation, but doing it in the virtual world on the virtual twin. And of course, you see inside our car is not a passenger, it's a dummy representing all of us, because that's what the industry wants. And so we have set out to see if we can do a little bit better. Since our goal was to try to take this technology and build a better world, better life for all of us, I thought, well, what are we doing in the medical space? Are we working? And so here are some examples. At the same time, when the automotive companies were building entire cars, the aerospace companies, entire jets, we were helping cardiovascular companies build better stents. Here you see something you may be familiar with, an old wear test. So on the left, you see a real wear test. You put your knee implant in, you run it for 3 months, and you see how well. Standard test for the FDA approval. On the right, you can do the same thing overnight. So if you're trying to build different implants, you don't have to wait 3 months to test your version. You can do hundreds of different designs in the same time. But one of the things that's missing from this is the patient. These are still very mechanical representations. And so I thought, why can't we represent the patient? After all, the body obeys the laws of physics, just like anything else, chemistry. We know how to do all these things. Why can't we put it all together? And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. Show you some examples of what the way we do it now, so we can actually use all those same methodologies, take the motion, analyze the kinematics, and reverse engineer what's happening inside the body, so you can see what's happening from the outside through the virtual twin, so you actually see what's happening to the bones, to the ligaments, to the muscles, how they're being activated, how the stresses are. And so we've built entire workflows to be able to go from the kinematic analysis, to be able to do surgical alignment targets, to look at pain, so we can analyze the before, optimize the surgery, and then analyze afterwards to see, so you can actually perform that surgery on the virtual patient before you do it on the real patient. Or if you're designing implants, you can design for the right patient population. You can decide what will give it a better longevity. You want to put it in younger people, so you may want a different action behavior. Large people, small people, you have all the ability to do that in the virtual world rather than having to test it all on actual physical humans. And so we have this great technology foundation that we now put together. Of course, we can also use virtual reality. This is an augmented reality system that doctors happen to actually like quite a bit, because you're not stuck in the virtual world with the headsets. It's just right there in front of you, and you can start to interact with it, and you can decide, okay, here's my surgery. As we're seeing in a number of hospitals we're working with, you can have 3 people gather around and all looking at the patient. So instead of looking at the imagery and trying to recreate what's happening, the 3-dimensional object from the 2-dimensional scans, you can actually be looking at a 3-dimensional representation of it. So we now have this great technology. We think we can do exactly the same thing that we've been able to do in these other worlds, and we just heard 2 elements, 2 ingredients, talking about artificial intelligence, which helps us sift through massive amounts of data to tell us what's important, or how to identify me in a large population, and then virtual reality, ways of representing that so that we can train our minds to understand what's most important in our most natural way, which is in the 3-dimensional world. But instead of artificial versions of what you're seeing in the surgical training or in the prep, these all behave like the real world, because they all have to obey the laws of nature. That's one of our ground truths. So we have kind of watermarking built into our objects because they can't avoid the fact that they have to behave the way nature intended. And so we have a system to actually now represent the patient, and we have access to all this data. And I think we heard earlier the goal today is not to talk about how we bring all these things together, but the need is to bring all these things together. And where do they come together is at the patient. And I think that's what we're struggling with, I think, as an industry, is to be able to see how can we take all these fragmented data, the sensor, the image data, the records, they're personal, and bring it together, because they're not disease-centric, they're not medical center-centric, they're patient-centric. So how do we get a patient-centric system? And so that's what we're building, where we bring together all of the data and then ultimately all of the people that are involved. And so I'm here to talk to you, hopefully, if we have some time today, or at least introduce our idea that we want this patient-centric version of the future. And then with that, we can do things like virtual implant testing, patient-specific surgery, so you can be sure you're doing the right one on the right patient beforehand. So Stefan mentioned that one of the reasons I'm optimistic about what we can do here is because one of my pilots really came in the cardiovascular industry. So of course the needs are a little bit higher when your operations are life-threatening. And so one of my first attempts to see if we could really make a difference in the industry was in cardiovascular. And so I looked out to the world like I did in orthopedics and said, wow, why don't we have a reference model for how the heart works? So if you're designing, Justin showed a TAVR, if you're designing those TAVR devices, those valves that replace patients, why are you testing in animals? Why are you testing in humans? Why are we not testing in virtual versions so we can optimize those procedures, we can train all of those? And I found there's lots of knowledge out there. It's divided between the scientific researchers, the doctors, the engineers, the medical device companies, the regulators, and I thought if we could get them all to work together, could we create that reference and take all the perspectives and let's all use that common reference? And that's what we did. So I created a project 10 years ago called the Living Heart Project, which now has 160 or so member companies representing hospitals, doctors, the regulators, the FDA's part of that, the industry, researchers, and we're all working against the same reference. And that reference now is actually a fully functioning version of the human heart. I won't go into it, I apologize. I know we're an orthopedic center, but this gives me the encouragement we can do it. We're able to create a fully functioning heart. It works just like the real heart. The electrical system, the AV node, the SA node propagates it down. It goes through the Purkinje fibers, stimulates the cardiomyocytes. That contracts. It then pumps the blood. We can look at the hemodynamics. You can introduce disease. You can cure those diseases. All works in the virtual twin. And so because we have this great community, hundreds of people all working together, they've taken this same representation, this now common ground truth, and applied it to virtually every type of system that you would encounter in the clinic in a human. So this represents, it can represent all the behavior, not 100 different models for 100 different types of systems, but one model that behaves just like all the things. And I mentioned this got attention of the FDA. So we're now working, this is a quote from Dr. Jeff Shuren, the head of the CDRH, who personally funded a project that we're just coming to the end of now to actually take the heart, represent an entire clinical population. And so we run a clinical trial on the virtual patient population before the real trial, so they can learn how to interpret that data to try to accelerate innovations, reduce the cost and time to market for innovation, kind of the same way we've been able to do it in other industries. It's also being used in the clinic, so I don't have time to go into these details. I'd love to talk to you about it. So this is Dr. David Hoganson presenting at our last conference, who's a pediatric cardiologist at Boston Children's Hospital, and they now, there are surgeries where they're using this now to not only train, but they're optimizing the surgery. The most complex surgeries that they have, it's now mandatory to do it on the virtual patient first. He even shared that the doctors, although there was a learning curve, an adoption curve, the final, where they're at now today, is that for the most complicated surgeries, the surgeon comes with their plan. 100% of the time when they sit down with the virtual twin, they come up with a better surgery. So we know that these virtual twins can do a bit better, like we heard with AI, because they have an unfair advantage. But you can use that to your advantage. And so I'm here to kind of call out to the community and say, well, why don't we do that for orthopedics? We have this great technology foundation, but we're not coordinated in the same way. And so I think we can use this sort of ground truth to bring and harness the AI, harness the virtual reality, the training, and kind of maybe bring this to address some of the most greatest challenges that you all face every day. So with that, I want to thank you.
Please give it up, Dr. Levine. Thank you. That was fantastic. And if there's one thing there's a bit of a theme here I hope you're noticing, is I'm trying to point out the obvious, that the airline or the manufacturing industry, the engineering industry, has already looked at some of the problems that we thought were entirely only being handled by us. We need to look outside our small individual workloads to see what other people are doing and learn from them and collaborate across space. So we heard about how we learned from the automotive industry with the talk on the ASC yesterday. I don't know if many of the representatives of large companies knew that you had done all this work on knees, for example, which is phenomenal. And this always happens. We always be open to looking outside of your worldview, see what's happening around us, because it does have applications internally to musculoskeletal care. Dr. Levine, thank you so much. We look forward to lots of collaboration in the future. Thanks
so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Fabrizio, to DOCSF Science, the clicker's over there.
Hello, good morning again. Second part. No. Oh, this is, okay. So today we have two sessions. We have two sessions. One is on sensor and XR. The other is on robotic surgery and cobots. I would like to invite my panelists up here, Cory, Calendine, Gavin, Stefan, all right, and Peter. All right, so you already met yesterday, Gavin and Peter. Today, also on the panel, we have Cory Calendine. Cory is a founder and partner of the Nashville Bone and Joint Institute. And he's a hip and only surgeon, right? Hip and knees only surgeon.
Hip and knee only. Man of a very narrow skill set.
Exactly. He's very passionate with robotic surgery and all the innovation technologies. Stefan is the co-founder of Innovate Orthopaedics in Texas, and he pioneered minimally invasive and computer-assisted hip and knee replacement surgery, and changed the way orthopedics is delivered in a much more individualized manner. All right, so let's start. Let's start with the first, our first paper. Cory.
Yeah, great, thank you. So glad to be with you, probably not qualified for the panel. I just want to disclose that and say it before you say it. The first paper is around evaluating a new virtual reality concept. You see it as well as I can, K-wire drilling with force feedback. And it actually ties in really well to what Justin was teaching us about. Now, I'm not so sure this is new. Virtual reality is here and coming. Largely what Justin was talking about is those headsets that are fully immersive. This is looking at something very different. This is a force feedback system. He was trying to reference that with regard to haptics, I think was the term he used. But you see here in this paper, they're not with the headsets now. You're watching a TV screen. In the top row there, if you just look far right, that's what the person doing the procedure is looking at during the entire procedure. And then work your way left. They're using a 3D printed model that kind of looks like a hand. They're using the drill. You see that in between those two images I was referencing. That drill has that force feedback. When you're placing a K-wire into bone, the surrounding cortex is hard. So you actually get a different force when you start drilling into the bone. Then the center part is softened, much like that dog bone that you've seen, hard outer, soft inner. And then when you get to the second cortex, it's firm again. So the whole concept in this paper is trying to show that with force feedback, you can place a K-wire safer and more accurately. Again, you're feeling. That's how we say it in surgery. You're feeling the first cortex. You're going through the softer bone and you're feeling the second cortex. So the concept here is, can you use this simulator and how would it compare to training in a cadaver? Now, a couple of general comments. Essentially, they took one group of mid-level residents is what they did. So third-year residents was the average. So one group they trained on cadavers, and then the other group they trained with this HVT system. Now, the test was actually in cadavers. You with me? So one group trained on cadavers, one group trained in virtual reality, but the test was actually in cadavers. So you would think the ones that trained in cadavers would have a advantage, but the paper actually showed the exact opposite. Not only were those trained in virtual reality able to do it faster, they were able to do it more accurately and safely. Remember how we talked about that second cortex? Once the pin hits the second cortex, you have maximal stability. You don't really want to over-penetrate. So really interesting concept here. One of the notable limitations, this is force feedback, very different than the cutaneous haptics that are allowed with the immersive systems. The rub here that I want you to see is between force feedback, which is this large simulator setup, again, top row all the way to the left, versus just something very portable with the immersive headgear.
Thank you.
Yeah.
10-second comment.
Yeah, so when I teach residents on in journal clubs, my typical advice to them is when they read a paper, is it new? Is it true? Is it going to change what you do? So is this new? Not quite. Is it true, which means does the methodology hold up? And I think it did, but I think it's already old. And is it going to change what I do? Probably not. I think there are better systems on the market.
Peter?
Yeah, the thing that stands out to me, I've seen these kind of papers go back and forth. So there's a paper on unicompartmental knee replacement in which they found no difference. But it's really what the functionality of the VR or these, haptics, whatever it is, gives you, and how do you get that to change, say, a trainee's behavior, where it's both easier to do it at home and you're incentivized to do it at home. And so it opens up this whole new opportunity to train. So this is just one facet, I think, of the bigger set of possibilities.
Yeah, if I can maybe add a little personal experience to learning. I'm a dyslexic, and I went through medical school, and it was extremely difficult for me to go, study all this stuff. And so I was always interested in how can I improve my learning as a dyslexic, because reading from left to right was extremely struggling. So I love things like this. I love the presentation today by Osso on virtual training, because we have so many different inputs, and every person is an individual, and some people are tactile, some people are intellectual, some people, they can't pick up a softball very well and drop it out of their hand. And so I love research like this because it will make us better surgeons, and it can allow for individualization of learning, which is something that, as a dyslexic, I never received in the medical education, which is an absolutely horrible way to go through life, trying to memorize a shit ton of information and not being able to read. So I always compliment people that do things like this. Great.
Let's switch to the second one.
Okay, yeah, this was my paper. I love the title. So this is about augmented reality. And in augmented reality, as you know, there has to be an interaction with the real world. So there's a 3D context, and there's the real world, and there has to be an interaction. And when this interaction happens, typically you have to be able to see your hands, because that's the source of your interaction. And what this paper was trying to do was to judge whether this near-field manipulation of the 3D context would change based on how the hand was, and let me get this word right, avatarized. So they had avatars for the hand. So they had 3 different modes where they had no avatar for the hand, so the candidate actually saw their own hand. They had another one that looked like a skeleton, and the third that looked like a hand with a white glove on it. So they had 3 different kinds of avatars. The second thing they did was they created this virtual box using Unity, and they used a HoloLens. The box, surprisingly, was this really odd shape, which is 47 by 45 by 33.65 centimeters. And they had at least 10, if not 20 balls in this virtual box. The goal was that the candidate would put their hand into this box and pick up certain yellow-colored balls without hitting the other balls. And they changed the variables where they would increase the number of balls, they would increase the the size of the balls, and they also changed the lighting of the virtual environment. And they looked to see the efficiency. They did not look at the time it took to pick up the balls, but how efficient they could be by reducing the number of collisions or counting the number of collisions. And interestingly, what they found was that you'd expect that the one where the candidate only saw their hands would be better, but it wasn't. They found that the avatarized hand, where either the skeleton-looking hand or the white-gloved hand actually performed better. On the other hand, when they did not have an avatar, it was worse when the light was dim, where light was better for the other avatars.
Okay, 5-second comment.
Yeah, avatarization is not a word, is what I would say first. Listen, I think we need to be mindful about these augmented reality platforms. What we're talking about is cognitive load. I have enough to think about in surgery. I need you to make augmented reality easy, and this is one step to that.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's small steps. What things can you improve about the interaction that actually improves engagement? And it seems like it's small, but it's a big deal because ultimately you want people to use it and like it and get benefit from it.
Stefan?
Yeah, no, interesting concept. And again, this multimodal approach to learning, I think this is a small piece in the puzzle that may help people learn different and better.
All right. Let's switch to the other one. Peter.
Yes. So this study has kind of a big buildup for, I think, a small thing they're testing. The short of it is this. There's a bunch of stuff in the operating room. Now we got even more. We got robots, stuff for imaging, yada, yada, yada. They bump into each other. And, so what they've created is digital twins for these big devices. And the idea is that, look, if you've got that digital twin and you've got your headset on, you might be able to tell if they're going to bump into each other or, I don't know, maybe contaminate the field. So that's what they've done. That's the buildup. And what they've actually just been testing, the reason there's two photos there is on the one side they say, hey, what if you controlled this by a joystick? So kind of an old school Atari fan versus what if you, controlled it like, your Nintendo with hold and press buttons. And then that's the science is comparing well. What did people like better? That's what you're seeing on the right, basically. And then on the left is how quickly could they accomplish these simple tasks, like tilting the table, moving the table. And it turns out they, in general, if you look at the left, they could do things faster with the buttons as opposed to the joystick. Joystick, apparently they fumbled with it a little bit, and you could move it both forward and sideways at the same time, probably a little hard. And then just usability-wise, looks fairly even, but maybe a little bit better with the hold and press buttons. So this paper, to me, I like it, not because the science is all that mind-blowing, but because it makes you think about, well, what's possible now if you have digital twins, not even just as people or organs, but what can you do with this? And this is a very simple solution for stuff bumps into each other. Is this a way to prevent it? But what more can you do beyond it? It's about looking the steps beyond.
Cory.
Yeah, I prefer the term virtual twin instead of digital. I'm just kidding. I was listening to the last lecture, though. Listen, let me just restate something from a surgeon's perspective. I'll tell you the truth. We're not very smart. And so the more of this that is done in a ambient kind of computing kind of concept, if you have a digital twin of everything in the operating room, stop asking me where to move it. Why don't you just go ahead and move it? Because our surgeries are very protocoled and routine. And so I think this is a great step towards, but people always want to show me a better way to do more during the procedure. Typically, we're not the ones moving these C-arms, right? There's somebody else in the room moving it for us. Well, that's a whole lot easier than me doing anything. So I think the real power here will be the ability to do it in an ambient environment, like it's intuitive, it's learning what I'm doing and moving towards me without me having to think about it. And then I think the other thing that's mentioned in the paper is voice commands, right? I don't always want to touch something. I want to move it by my voice, and that will all come.
Gavin?
Yeah, I completely agree with Cory. I think there's too much going on with us concentrating on the actual surgery to be worried about everything else. Although I do think that this might have been directed towards the circulating nurse, controlling things, which might be advantages. But I think it was very simplistic, but I think these papers are necessary to evolve into what's going to happen next.
Yeah, can I counter with one thing? I mean, I think we're not all that smart, I agree, but it's also our job prevents us from taking the steps beyond to be more creative and imaginative in terms of what we could do with it. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I want to echo what Cory said as far as other people doing this and being in the operating room, and I agree, we're not that smart. Just a small example is I operate at the hospital and at the surgery center, and at the hospital they put the little Bovie holder in the wrong place every time. It interferes with me broaching when I do an anti-broach hip replacement. But in the surgery center, they figured out that it's in the wrong place, and they always put it in the right place. It's a small detail, but it's really annoying when that Bovie is always in the way from me broaching the femur. And so these kind of studies where you can optimize positioning, especially in the ASC now, where there's smaller ORs and there's always more equipment, you know, the robots get bigger as by the day, that this kind of stuff can really help efficiencies and put a little bit of more science behind it.
Okay, so one question to close this session for everybody. So, you know, from all this paper, I get, you know, sometimes what we think is the right way of doing things is not really the right way, it turns out. For example, you know, with virtual reality, you think that haptic feedback is much better than the skin sensory feedback, and instead it's not. In this case, you think a joystick is better than a button, and it's not. In the other, you think that looking at your hand in a realistic way would help you better than just looking at, you know, skeleton or the glove. So what's going on here? Help me out.
Well, I think what you're hitting up against is these are important questions, and sometimes our best guess is not the truth. I thought Peter said it really well, that we have to be involved as surgeons in order to articulate this, and that's really the power. I salute Bini and so many others that have organized this conference, because it's about bringing together the end user, right, the surgeon, that have their own thoughts with some of these technologies, and the things that we're going to find, the things that are going to work, you can't guess at. So.
Yeah.
Go ahead. That's all right.
Yeah, I agree with everyone, and I agree with you. I think you cut through the chase and seen it. The common theme here in these papers are that what may seem intuitive may not necessarily be the reality, and we have to do these little, what may initially seem like silly little tests, research papers, but they are actually essential.
Peter?
I'm left with nothing more, and we're out of time, so I'll pass it back.
One final comment. George Bernard Shaw once said, the highest form of intelligence is to keep an open mind. And I think this shows it that while we might think this is the correct way, just keep an open mind and then you will improve, because it is the highest form of intelligence.
Sounds good. So let's switch to the second. Okay, Cory.
You want me to say?
Yeah, stay, Cory.
So the first paper here, I'd like to object to the paper. There's a lot of math in the paper, and there's a lot of big words, but let's just break down the title. So code manipulation. Let me tell you about robotics. There are a couple different ways that robotics are classified in this paper, and very, very quickly. There's the teleoperation, like the Da Vinci. This is soft tissue, not really relevant to orthopedics. There's the autonomous, like think surgical, where essentially you set things up and then the robotic arm itself executes. And then there's what they call code manipulation. And what they mean by that is the surgeon can manipulate the arm, and the arm itself is giving the surgeon some guidance. So that's the concept of code manipulation. The whole concept about exteroceptive visual coupling just means there's a camera. So there's a camera watching not only the end effector, in this case a drill, but also watching the patient. And so obviously it's the combination of those two things, the coupling of not only knowing exactly where the drill is, but also knowing exactly where the patient is, here a spinal model. You have to have both those sources. So the concept here with co-manipulation is trying to leave the surgeon in control. And actually I think there's great value in that. I think there's a lot about feel that we keep bumping up against with the surgeon, that we have to allow the surgeon to remain in some level of control, but we need a better way of accomplishing it, and that's what they're trying to get at with this paper. I mentioned there's a lot of math in the paper. Did you know that pedicle screw placement, that's what they're talking about, placing a screw in the spine around the spinal cord, pedicle screws are misplaced 8.3 to 50.3% of the time. Yikes. And the paper is trying to get a level of precision in the cervical spine. Let me just tell you this about the cervical spine. The bones are smaller and the spinal cord's bigger. So if you want to practice in the lumbar spine where the nerves are spread out and the bones are bigger. But they're trying to get the level of accuracy, and they're just illustrating a relatively new concept in the spine world. There are some robotic systems already in the spine world, but not really illustrated quite as this, the co-manipulation of the end cutting instrument. By the way, co-manipulation in our world in orthopedics is like the Mako device, if you know that system, where essentially the computer knows exactly where the saw blade is and exactly where the leg is in space. And it's a great illustration of that. Again, there's a lot of math that goes into it. There's 7 degrees of freedom here on this robotic arm. That's very critical because, again, where you're starting, your entry point, your angle, and your depth of penetration, very critical for placement. So do we want to improve on 50% malplacement of screws around the spinal cord? The answer is yes, and robotics will help us get there.
All right, quick comment.
Yeah, interestingly, this is not CT-based, so the computer did not know where the shape of the bone was. What was interesting to me was that the surgeon placed the drill into this position that the surgeon thought it would need, and then the robot held it there. And the idea is that when the patient breathes and moves, it just follows the movement of the bone. So this is still not as precise as image-based robotics, but it's somewhere in between.
Rarely do I hear about spine surgery and get excited about changing fields to that from arthroplasty. This, to me, just seems like a real sweet spot in terms of this technology helping it. I mean, the stakes are really high. The errant pedicle screw, that's frightening to think about, the error rate. And so it just seems like a very important topic and a great piece of anatomy to work on.
Stefan.
Yeah, I enjoyed this paper. It actually was a really nice summary about what robotics is that you nicely reviewed on tele as well as autonomous versus guided. Having done a little bit of work with KUKA and the 7 degrees of freedom are important for trocar kinematics. And, I'm a big fan of autonomous robots because I think I'm a pretty good surgeon, but I still think an autonomous robot can do better than I can, having had some experience with autonomous robotics. So I'm excited to see that there's some work done in autonomous robotics, which this obviously is.
All right, next one. Stefan.
Towards reducing the visual workload.
That's you, right?
Uh-huh. So that's the one with the gun, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason why I picked that paper, why I really enjoyed reading it, is it has, we always felt that haptic is the future, and this paper really shows a nice way of a new concept where the gun not just gives you a haptic feedback by resisting, but by vibrating and guiding you in one direction or another. So this gun actually has the sensations on the gun, and from a standpoint of this being integrated into future workload, I think it could really make us more efficient, because I know now when I do navigation or when I do a robotics case, I'm always looking where's the monitor, and And some people are really good about putting the monitor behind me, especially when I do a trauma case. And the other day I was doing a fracture, and I mean, I nearly cramped up in my neck because I kept turning around. And then there was at least 8 people in the operating room. I says, is anybody realizing that I'm struggling here, and can you put that monitor somewhere else? Well, this will kind of eliminate that, because it then guides the surgeon on where to go. And so I thought the uniqueness of this, which was really interesting, and that's why I gave it a very high rating.
Perfect. Cory.
Yeah, I thought was really interesting is the surgeons that were participating in this study enjoyed the process. So they make a big issue, you know, Stefano talks about this all the time. It's got to be friendly to the surgeon. It's got to be easy for the surgeon. And I think this kind of integrated flow, right, not twisting our neck, is powerful.
I like this paper because for 2 reasons. One is it was a new concept that you'd get different kind of haptic feedbacks in 4 different directions, which is a completely new concept to me. The other thing I like, because I'm a bit of a nerd, and although I'm not an engineer, I do some small electronic projects, and every one of those products the components are all bought from Adafruit, which is very easy to get. So I could have made this, but I don't know anything about the math.
Peter?
Yeah, we have 5 senses, and we utilize all of those as we're doing surgery. So wherever you can augment those to either, you know, improve them, reduce cognitive load, and so I think it's quite clever thinking about this in a slightly different way in terms of just the haptics.
All right.
See, I'm hoping that they can convert this to improve my golf stroke, right? So have it put a whole suit on me and it'll vibrate and make sure that I swing correctly. So maybe there's hope for me to get a better handicap.
All righty. Peter.
Yeah, so I enjoyed this study. This is a study where it's the early stages of building toward a robot that assists with surgery that understands something about context. I think throughout life I'm a little bit addicted to context. I think context matters. If I say the word colon right now, you're probably thinking an organ, right? If you're at a writing seminar, you're not thinking about the organ, you're thinking about the punctuation. So in all these technologies, context matters a great deal. So what they did is they are doing robotic-assisted colon surgery. Yeah, we are at an orthopedics conference, but this is a good paper. And they're trying to get it to assist with 2 simple things. One is recognizing the temporal step within the operation. What phase of the operation are they at? And not being a colorectal surgeon, I can't remember what those steps are. And then the other thing is semantic segmentation. Okay, word salad for folks who don't know the space, but it is, hey, can you recognize an organ, a tissue plane, maybe something you should avoid, a ureter, things of that nature. And they had a relatively small sample size, but they had video footage of these surgeries, and they annotated the data as best they could. I think it was just 1 person, but hey, you got to start somewhere. And what they found basically is with that relatively limited number of cases, of course, making use of transfer learning, they were able to fairly accurately identify the phase of surgery with just 50, 60 cases. Okay, good step. The F1 was like 0.8, so okay, reasonable for a small sample, and didn't do as well when it came to segmentation. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. You can just imagine sort of the change of state. So, if I were doing this surgery, all of a sudden what we've identified is the edge of the colon might become a lot more bloody than it had been earlier. Maybe I'm running the bovie, there's smoke, maybe there's new glare that wasn't there before, maybe the camera bumped up against something and now it's all foggy. And so that's a much bigger challenge, and it's going to require a lot more data. So I think the point here is that, look, this is early stages, but like a lot of things, we need more data and we need good data, and you have to be thoughtful about how you collect it, both with the hardware and how you annotate it.
No, I think that's great. I think it speaks to the complexity. This AI segmentation in particular did not do well in real world. talking about with smoke and blood and all those things that Peter was mentioning. And this is a critical element, because if we apply these things in the lab and they work well, but it doesn't work in the real world, it's kind of useless. So very interesting paper. I'd encourage you to kind of flip through it, even as a non-colon surgeon. And I'm glad they're not using the sense of smell in this paper. But, you know, being able to help guide the surgeon is powerful, but it's got to work in the real world.
I think I also like this paper. I mean, think about the potential about where this is going. To identify structures within the abdomen, it'll be far easier to do it in orthopedics where there's only bones. But the safety features that this could eventually help with is amazing. In the abdominal surgery, the difference between the ureter and some of the nerves is very difficult to differentiate. So if this can do that and help towards maintaining safety, this would be huge.
Yeah, my wife does Da Vinci surgery, and she always says one thing she worries about the most is the ureter, right? You know, it takes 10,000 cases to be an expert, which most of us will achieve when we retire. This technology might actually cut that down to 5,000. So if every surgery you do gets recorded, and then it adds a level of learning of where this structure might be or this structure might be, this might really cut down our learning curve to become an expert.
Thank you. So one quick question, final question for everybody. Robotic surgery, cobots, where are we going? What do you want to see happen in the next coming years? Stefan.
You know, from a very specific standpoint of orthopedic surgery, my dream is to have an autonomous robot, an AI-driven planning software combined with a 3D printed custom implant. Are we going to achieve that in the next 2 years, the next 5 years, next 10 years? I don't know. But I always say my hips run marathons, my knees do not, and there's a reason for that. And I think that's part of the problem, because we're not combining those three things at this stage.
Peter.
For me, it really comes down to data. I know a lot of people think this way, it's not novel, but for me, the robots are most exciting because they're data collection tools. And so these have now been brought into one of the most sacred spaces in all of healthcare, and they're an instrument that collects data. And so being able to organize that data in a cogent way to start to understand what processes, what practices are superior to others, it's really going to require good, clean data. And I'll just mention federated learning, which would come way farther down the line to actually get the sample sizes, generalizability across institutions.
Kevin.
Yeah, I completely agree with Peter. And at the moment, the way I'm using robotics is there's preoperative planning and intraoperative execution. At the moment, the preoperative planning is based only on the information I've generated over years of doing surgery. I think the next step is to be able to collect all the data the robots have collected over the last few years and then guide me to make that preoperative plan, because the intraoperative execution is already here. And then, of course, there can be iterative improvements in the actual execution, smaller size robots, et cetera. But to me, that preoperative planning is very important.
Yeah, and just to kind of tag on and throw a bomb in the room. So data, a personalized plan, I love it, but we have to speak about liability. So if these companies are going to say, hey, I have the data, I have the perfect personalized plan, they have to accept responsibility when things go wrong. Currently, we as a society are more comfortable with letting that sit on the shoulders of surgeons. So something to think about.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
I've asked Anne to come back. I can never pronounce that name. Tajahar, thank you. And to come back and spend a little more time with us and talk about integration later. So thank you for coming down. I appreciate you making time for us. So here's the problem. We have a lot of point solutions out there. A lot of companies that, for the right reason, are focusing on one problem and solving it. And I have this role as a chief technology officer, but really it's more a transformation officer at our department. And I want to pull these technologies in, but the health system just puts up this barrier because they're concerned about cybersecurity issues. And my understanding is that there's a solution for that, and it's called this interoperability or middleware, people call it, something that sits between the technologies that are point solutions and the electronic health record. Can you tell us a bit about those technologies?
Sure. There's a few different approaches that are actually being taken. I think there's the innovators of the world that are acting as this orchestration layer where there are point solutions that can ultimately work into the workflow. I think it is still in its early stages too, and being able to stand some of that up, even as large as this company is. There's organizations like Panda. Panda is actually, Vizient is behind it, and they're a GPO, so they're working.
GPO?
General Purchasing Organization. So they're working with certain contractors to go through the RFP process, get all of the approval, own and manage that portion for the hospital so that they can look at which are going to get through. And they just are establishing kind of a framework and a way to actually pull those through. And then, there's Zelf. Zelf is another organization that was stood up out of Providence Ventures that was really there trying to figure out the point solutions that were coming in from the employer side of the equation, where they knew they had lives, they knew they had patients that were being offered certain benefits from their employers, and there really wasn't the ability to adopt and know which patients. Now, the thing about Zelf, one of the things they look at is, of course, the lives that are there and the benefits that are there, and then they prioritize ultimately which of these solutions should be in a health system. I think it all starts, though, very much so by identifying your contracts and your managed care contracts or your value-based care contracts or what the financial incentives are for the hospital to make the case of which solutions are going to actually generate the revenue that you need for the hospital. We see, particularly in value-based care, a swing anywhere from $400 to $700 million of things that aren't being captured, where there could be a digital solution that could capture that for you. But until the hospital actually identifies some of those financial priorities and where there's money left on the table, that's the motivator.
So there's all these layers we don't think about. Sometimes we get stuck with thinking about the app for the robot or whatever, but really there's the payment layers, there's the benefits layers, all tag into these same data sources. And then, of course, there's redox, right?
There is redox. And I would always say that, when you've done a health system integration, you've done one health system integration. I don't know that there is a complete, every health system tends to be a little bit different. I think the organizations can create a nice API and layer to plug in, but the health the connection that you need ultimately to be able to share data with HL7 in particular, and there are particular places where the health system is going to dictate what those requirements are.
So you went to HIMSS and you heard some stuff that really blew your mind. Tell us about that.
Well, HIMSS was fascinating this year. I think ChatGPT was certainly all of the rage at HIMSS. The Microsoft Epic announcement with ChatGPT was probably one of the biggest announcements that we saw. I think there's a lot of guidelines that are still waiting to come out on what's going to be permissible. I think there is a crawl, walk, run with this that makes sense, like benefits checking and writing some of the claims denials letters and the administrative realities of using ChatGPT. But can Epic use this to actually surface the best solutions to assist the doctor to treat the patient? Is there something with Doximity too? I think we saw Doximity with their chat GPT bot on top of their site that's able to answer a lot of questions for the patients. That was really interesting. And then one of the most kind of profound solutions that I saw was actually NTT data that has a fully humanoid bot that is able to do facial recognition and talk to you. Her name is Ava. She's able to schedule appointments for you. She's able to actually hold your hand. And then right now in working on a project about how Ava can be a health coach for the patient as well, specifically for diabetes management. Because sometimes the patients are actually more comfortable interacting with the robot and telling them they're eating too many candy bars or whatever it may be. But Ava is serving as a health coach with a lot of empathy.
And what I'm really interested in is what you started with, which is this connection friction, starting to connect these disparate platforms at an entry level that you may not consider to be relevant, like claims data. But now you've got the electronic health record connected through Azure Cloud and ChatGPT to solve a problem that was previously complex, that would require a lot of human interface to manage. That's the beginning. That's how these things start. And then they move up the chain, and you start seeing. So the important thing for us, sort of in the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of orthopedic surgery, but its integration into healthcare, is understanding when you start seeing these patterns, where do they lead? And eventually, we'll get to the integration layer we're both dreaming of, where it's just plug and play like your iPhone, where you just have an app.
I still think that there'll be a requirement for the health system strategically to get together and devise digital formularies and prioritize those digital formularies and solutions around the goals that they need to meet.
Yeah,
so
digital formularies means not drugs.
Not drugs, but the digital solutions and the digital therapies that the health system wants to use to treat their patients.
So, 1 second left. There was one company that did that well, and they had a cloud-based healthcare system, which is the difference is if your healthcare system relies on a sort of a legacy infrastructure where all your data sits on premises, as I say, and it's not in the cloud, then for every instance of that in deployment, you have to do different integration. Whereas if you're up in the cloud, any integration can happen real time, which allowed them to create an ecosystem of apps. And the way they did it, and this is Jonathan Bush's company, they were able to say, okay, to the formulary, well, that's his new company, Athena. They had a formulary of apps. So whatever app you want, say take all the ones in the room outside and 2 dozen that you saw at some other company. They were all accessible to all the doctors. And then they tracked to see how well they were used. And to the extent they were being used, they stayed. To the extent they were not being used, they just disappeared. And so it was enabling because they're all fully integrated. They could share data between themselves and with the health record, and it was all accessible. It was a really sort of a wonderful, futuristic look at how we're going to be able to integrate that. And thank you so much for taking time. I know you were busy this morning to come down and talk to us a little bit about this little integration concept. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So our next session is part of that, the four-legged stool of DOCSF, which is the cold question about, we've talked about the technology, we have the community, we've talked about the change management, and actually interesting how it came up again in Justin's talk, the importance of change management in the deployment of technology. And we're now going to go move into the element of the session, which is around policy and value-based care. And I'm going to bring up our moderator, Dr. Zev Kane, who is a friend, but also the founder of one of the value-based care conference, which is amazingly successful and really an extraordinary thing that he puts on every year. Now, the other thing is you have more titles than God. So I'm not going to bother. just realize this man is extremely accomplished, and I'm so glad that you made the time to join us today. Please welcome to this DOCSF stage, Dr. Zev Kane. Thank you, brother. And the clicker's there, and the microphone.
Thank you, Stefano. First of all, congratulations for a wonderful conference. I've learned a lot, and I just said to Dr. Vail that my challenge is now to implement some of it, because that's the challenge coming from a conference like this. My name is Zev Kane. As Stefano said, I'm the founder of the Orthopedic Value-Based Care Conference. I'm actually an anesthesiologist. And this concept, I got interested in value-based care when I was the chief medical officer of UC Irvine Health. Fell in love with it and started the conference series. And let's move on to the panel. John, Marc. Excellent. And Steve, please have a seat, everybody. Grab seats. We have enough seats? Excellent. All righty. So why don't we start with a round of introductions? Let's start from the left. John?
So I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I went to Harvard Business School later in my career, mainly inspired by Michael Porter and his ideas about value-based healthcare. I then took a course on innovation in healthcare with me and a bunch of VCs, and then went full boat on the executive program. And everything that I do now, since then, is viewed through the lens of value. And I think one of the things we should probably talk about is try to define value, because it's different things when you talk with administrators or vendors or yourself or the patient. And the biggest problem, I think, that I see is lack of alignment.
Steve?
Steve Schutzer, orthopedic surgeon, hip and knee arthroplasty. JP was my resident, but we're not going to go back that far. I've been involved with value-based healthcare since 2008, set up a couple of centers of excellence for joint, spine, sports, and trauma. Launched a startup, Upswing Health, I pitched on Wednesday, and a co-founder of a grassroots organization called the Moving to Value Alliance.
I'm Marc Gruner. I'm a sports medicine physician and co-founder and chief medical officer of Limber. We're a remote therapeutic monitoring platform and also work on innovative value-based care models. I worked at CMMI for a brief period of time and drank the Michael Porter Kool-Aid and did my training at Mayo Clinic, where I've been working on innovative orthopedic value-based care models.
Thank you. This is a fantastic panel, guys, because they represent a multidisciplinary group just in front of us. So the first question is the following. I'm sure that, or the first point of discussion, all of us have heard about the amalgamation or suggested amalgamation between Kreuzer and Geisinger, right? Everybody heard about it? It's supposed to be one of the biggest deals of healthcare ever. That's supposed to create a new organization that's going to devote, it's going to be a new platform for value-based care. So we heard that. We just saw Amit's brilliant presentation about how value-based care is just about here. Now, I'll be honest with you, when I started our conference in the same year Stefano started his, 2017, I thought it's right here. It's tomorrow, right? It's tomorrow. It's the big deal. It's a decade later. It's not here yet. So, but there are a lot of things this year, especially with Kreuzer and what Amit said. So let's start from the left again. And I want an actual answer, and then you can give a small explanation. But do you feel that there is an inflection point now for value-based care adoption in orthopedics, in this, let's not call it orthopedics, let's call it in the musculoskeletal space? And it's a different question, obviously. Yes or no, and then an explanation, but I need a yes or no first.
Yes, I'm sorry, no where I am, yes maybe elsewhere. Because everything's contextual, and we all work in different environments.
I'm talking about, think about your community of orthopedic surgery.
So overall, moving in that direction, but not yes. So, no. Okay. But an optimistic almost. Can I just, you said we should explain something? So, you know, I work at a very complex, large medical center that's getting more and more complex because they're doing their own kind of merger scenario where Mass General and Brigham are now becoming Mass General Brigham, like that's hard to pronounce, but, and they're making themselves bigger and bigger. In order to control the market and do the opposite of value-based care is what I kind of see. That said, we published on a value-based care model created by physicians and brought it to the organization with warranty on outcome, et cetera, and they turned us down. That was about 10 years ago, and that was with Bob Kaplan from Harvard Business School. So I tend to be a little bit cynical where I work, but optimistic that you out here are going to do a better job than we do.
Okay. Steve.
Yeah, it's so hard to say yes or no. As a bright spot optimist, I would say yes, more likely than no. We heard a lot about it here. You know, when you think about the inflection point, I go to the diffusion of innovation curve, and are we at that 16% where this is going to gain steam and sort of become unstoppable? I think so. How about you?
I would say not yet. I've been working on the models for 15 years. I was talking about this with you earlier, Steve. I think that we have to be really smart about getting claims data from payers. My companies were funded by Blue Venture Fund, and I talked to a lot of payers across the country. and they're just not there yet. And so they have to be able to give those claims quickly and concisely to providers to know how they can intervene and be able to design some of these models, and they're not really there yet. But at the same time, there's a lot of innovation and other ways that we can get there, and but not yet.
I'd say yes in 5 years.
Okay. All right, that's fair. Next question, and it's really driven by Amit's presentation. You know, I was intrigued when Stefano presented our panel. He says we're moving now to the health policy area. So I don't perceive value-based care as a policy. I perceive it more as an operational model, but that raises a very interesting question, Amit, which is it possible that some of the lack of success of CJR was because they really just focused on the money issues and not changing how we actually practice? And so I'm putting it out to you, and think beyond just operating, think about the entire perioperative episode, and you think that that could be an explanation why we are just not saving enough money, because simply we're not focused on the practice itself.
We're going from my end? Yeah. So I'm very much involved in this and from the standpoint of I analyzed the finances of our department in the ambulatory center and the main hospital and looked at structure and culture at the same time. And the biggest problem is alignment and control, to be fair. We control all these resources that lead to cost. And we know from analyzing that if you do a rotator cuff repair in my institution, the cost can vary by a factor of 8 depending on who's doing it. So you don't really need to, it's not hard to figure out who's gaining money, who's losing money. The problem is, how do you motivate humans, behavioral motivation, to make that shift? And the only way to do it is with alignment. And what kind of alignment are you talking about? Co-management gain sharing? Is it going to be punitive for certain things, or what? And in my experience at my large academic medical center, that kind of alignment has been slow to come. But that will go very far to creating value for everyone across the process if we become collaborators, not employees, in this process.
You know, I think CJR, first of all, BPCI preceded CJR. It was voluntary. So those entities that saw an opportunity opted in. My organization never did, because we had already cut out the fat, reduced length of stay, sent people home, no ECFs. So we never opted into BPCI. CJR was involuntary. Right? So entities were not prepared there was no alignment, and it was hospital-based, right? You didn't have much choice. It was a hospital-based program, and if you were in an MSA, that you were in it. So I wasn't very optimistic about it from the start.
Yeah, I think it's a little complicated, but you know, there's 5 things that can really show value in orthopedic care. There's changing the site of service, lowering ED admissions, going downstream or upstream to address appropriateness of care. But in order to do all these things, you need to really collect the data and be able to collect those patient-reported outcome measures. And if you're not tying and coordinating the care of the episode together, then it becomes really challenging.
I agree. I think it's the 2 big things are the incentive question around, you know, how do you make a health system whole to make it worth their while? That is a really hard thing to get over. And the other is the operational questions, right? And the integration of care and data.
So I think that's where I actually have an advantage, guys, because I am an anesthesiologist and a perioperative physician. And when we developed the perioperative surgical home model, the idea was that before the patient gets to you to operate on, we need to optimize the patient to start with. If the patient has a hemoglobin of less than, if the patient has a hemoglobin A1C larger than, if the patient has respiratory diseases, all those things will determine the length of stay and the cost. And that's why the challenge is when you just use it as a financial model, you're missing all that, because you really have to optimize the patients. And by the way, you can look at lengths of stay. But to me, there is a triad of length of stay, discharge disposition, i.e. the patient goes home or goes to a nursing home, and readmission. I can change lengths of stay to 1 day. I'll just send everybody to the nursing home, right? But then, and I can send them from there after 1 day, but then all will bounce back. So that's why I think that it has to be a more complex clinical model, and that's how you'll get more into it. There was a recent report, although I saw it by Bain, that talks about how 80% of the physicians support value-based care. However, it dramatically reduces based on the downside risk that they get. So your response is how to fix it? Do you think that first, do you think that report makes sense, that I support value-based care as long as there's no down risk for me and maybe an upside risk? But once there is, it's a real problem. Let's start from this side now.
I think that's absolutely right. So I think when we've done similar surveys, right, the level of understanding and conviction in having the capabilities needed is very low, even though the awareness of the models is high. And that's where conveners and sort of capability enhancement of physicians, whether it's an MSO, whether it's other models, become really, really important. Because what you can do there is absorb some of the downside risk and still make it so that you're sort of gradually transitioning the physician community.
I mean, selling to orthopedic groups and PT groups across the country, I can tell you that it's been really impressive seeing how many people want to do value-based care on the provider side, but the incentives need to be there and they have to be correct, and it has to be a glide path to that. So that's why I helped create the remote therapeutic monitoring codes, because I think you got to use these codes to provide services to get there, coordinate the care, but that's only one piece of it. You have to be able to start with shared savings and then work to a capitated model. An orthopedic surgeon cannot take risk right away. They do want to know what that benchmark is and be able to dip their toes in the water, and if the incentives are there, they'll go after it and be aggressive, but it can't just be full risk right away, because it's very unpredicted, and I think that's something that we really have to take into consideration.
Yeah, I think most of my colleagues support value-based payment models, and we've had a bundled payment program, since 2010. And the reason is, if you look at the percent of the dollar that the surgeon got without the bundle, is about 6% of the dollar. But in a value-based model, based on TDABC, we didn't kind of pull the number out of our hat, the surgeon's piece of that dollar went up threefold. And all they had to do was follow 22 clinical protocols. I mean, that's all they had to do. And it wasn't that bad. But they did, and they adopted that. As far as risk, you've got to have the data. But again, if you look at the opportunity, isn't that where the $1 trillion is? Isn't taking that risk and arming people with the proper technology to manage that?
So I'll answer it a little bit based on history and based on what I know. And we work with Bob Kaplan from Harvard Business School and the chief medical officer of a HMO called Harvard Pilgrim, and came up with a warranty on outcome and a bundle. And I'm not talking about capitation, I'm talking about a bundle. And we warrantied the outcome, so we took all the risk. And we were turned down, and largely the reason was that it would have replaced a relatively lucrative contract that the hospital already had with that insurer. So why would they want to partner with us? But there's a very, very interesting article published that I'm sure most of you never saw in the 1980s in, I think, arthroscopy. Lanny Johnson was a pioneer in innovation in business, and he created a bundle himself with a local insurer near Lansing, Michigan, with a warranty on outcome for 1 year for all the arthroscopies he did. And his profit went up 30% that year. And I mean, he did this in the 80s, and here we are trying to redo this sort of a thing. And I think the most important thing is to be able to deliver and minimize your risk. And that may be the case in certain kinds of procedures versus other procedures, but you build that collaboration with the contracts you have, and then you scale it accordingly. So far, the alternative, at least where I work, is much more attractive for the organization than doing that.
So do we think that, quite honestly, even the word risk implies just a downside? What's the upside? And you did address it to some degree, but I just want everybody. What's the upside for an orthopedic surgeon if they'll be part of a risk-sharing model? Upside, not downside.
You asking me?
Sure.
Yeah, it can be lots of different things, but I just told you, you can have a premium for taking the risk. That's one thing, or you can do co-management gain sharing model with your organization, and that assumes some risk as well. So it also ensures that you may have a more attractive product and thus a greater flow of patients to you, particularly if you're doing direct contracting with an organization. So it has a lot of different forms, but at the end of the day, you have to define some value for the physician who's doing it, because they're the ones, hospital may be taking risk, but they are as well. And the problem in many organizations is when you have high performers and low performers, who gets into it and who doesn't? Because the low performers or the low volume surgeons will statistically have a higher complication rate, and that may blow up your agreement.
For orthopedic surgeons, the upside is the downside, right? I mean, I think orthopedic surgeons are gradually, and you mentioned this, 60% of the spend is on probably mistreatment, waste, low value. If orthopedic surgeons become managers of MSK, they can accrue the value that they really deserve on the downside. But, the upside becomes a downside for an orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah, I think for an orthopedic surgeon, there's two things. One, making sure that they have a higher volume of appropriate patients. So at Mayo, I always thought it was interesting that for every patient that a surgeon would see, they would have a 50% surgical rate. In the DC area, where I practice for a private practice orthopedic group, it's for every 10 patients they see, they have 1 surgery. So it's improving their surgical rate if they can create a good model. But the more important thing, and that's where I think value-based care can go for that. But the more important thing that's really, really, I think, one of the biggest challenges, but you'll see it more in the private practice orthopedic groups, is if they control the entire episode. So from the time someone gets seen for that musculoskeletal injury throughout their entire episode, that's where you'll see more value and be able to create more value and use physician innovation to try to think about new models to shift care.
So Amit, can you please define for the audience, I don't know how many understand the difference between an episode of care bundle versus a condition-based bundle?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point, Marc. So I think, the traditional bundles in CJR or BPCI start when a procedure happens, right? So a TJR claim drops, and that's where they start. They go 30 days before and 90 days after, some variation of that. So you're really anchoring it on a procedure, and you're only going to see the value for the patients that had the procedure. So what you're not doing is actually getting at a lever where the procedure didn't need to happen in the first place. The way you can do that is to start the arrangement when the diagnosis is made, right? So now, if you have the patient who had knee pain, if you prevent that patient from having the procedure by using conservative methods, the entire cost of the procedure becomes the savings, right? Because in the past, they would have gotten that procedure, so that becomes the savings. You've saved that entire cost of the procedure and are getting value from it. I'll say maybe 2 other things. Of course, that means your professional fee for the procedure went away. So how do you sort of get over that? The way you do that is by getting sort of a broader pool of patients in what you're managing. And if you are able to demonstrate sort of better outcomes, better patient satisfaction, let's not underestimate the value of that, right? Better patient satisfaction by engaging the patients earlier, educating them, navigating them. You become more attractive as a network to payers who are then now willing to put you in a preferred tier or narrow their network, et cetera, to get you the better volume to take care of that delta. Last thing I'll say is we should not underestimate sort of, doctors became doctors for a reason. It's to provide care and to drive outcomes and to drive health. And reinforcing that we've found is incredibly important.
I agree, and people become orthopedic surgeons because they want to operate mostly. So are we now basically saying that you expect orthopedic surgeons to do a lot of MSK management, which they may or may not want? And I'm asking the panel because they're orthopedic surgeons.
I'm going to let the orthopedic surgeons answer that.
Yeah.
I'll take that first. I think we should. I mean, who else, as you mentioned, MSK is a top 3 category of plan spend year over year, right? It's an enormous space. Who better to manage MSK than orthopedic surgeons?
Oh, I can think about a bunch of specialties that are costing less to the system.
That would cost less?
Right. Oh. I mean, we can talk for a second about family practitioners who got specialized training in sports medicine, and they make much less money. And they, for a non-operative, they may deliver the same level of care. So it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is Clayton Christensen's idea of disruptive innovation. And that is that you get a less expensive alternative that can scale to the larger marketplace. And that's happening anyway. And AI may be part of that as well. It may be disruptive innovation through AI in terms of the things that we now do. What's happened, however, at least where I am, my vantage point is, and it's connected to burnout, is all of the documentation that we have to do after our extensive training, which is completely contrary to the business model that Kaplan and Porter would have in terms of the experts should do expert things, not menial things. And so this makes it a very complicated question to answer. But I think inevitably what we've been talking about with AI, and that's going to disrupt a lot of what we do and provide value in and of itself because we get back time, and time is money. The other point I wanted to make is if you talk about value and then you want to talk about who is actually getting the value, the patient, the doctor, the hospital, the vendor, whatever, value is temporal. And particularly in joint replacement surgery, the longer you go from the time of the surgery, the more value the patient gets, which can figure into how we make decisions about the implants we use and the cost of them. And cross-linked polyethylene is a perfect example, because there was some resistance at my institution, even though they created it, to allow the doctors to use it because it had a price premium connected to it. But of course, ethically, that's the patient capturing all the value downstream. So there are all sorts of components here in terms of when you talk about value or value-based care, whatever, is how long you're looking at and who's capturing the value. And that's a tug of war, if you will, in some ways.
So I asked the question, and here's one suggested solution to the question, which is if a large orthopedic group owns the bundle, okay, let's talk about an Ortho Carolina, for example, or Poliance or Rothman, okay, they own a bundle. Now they can actually hire or refer the patients to family practitioners who are experts in sports medicine. And then only those people who need have surgery by the surgeons, who, by the way, their time, it's like, honestly, it's like taking an F-35 pilot and asking them to do something that less qualified people can do. No offense to anyone, okay? But that's a model. That's a model that maybe people will engage to.
No, I mean, I think that's the model of the future, because a lot of people will say that when you go see your primary care doctor, you might not get the right diagnosis. But if you get the right diagnosis, you triage, you risk stratify, you attribute that provider, that orthopedic provider early on in the episode, then you really can manage the episode more holistically. And I think that's the key, is finding that attribution to be either the physician visit of the specialist or when they see that physical therapy evaluation with in that orthopedic group, and then starting that and measuring it over a 6-month or 12-month episode and going at risk in that model is what's going to be successful in the future.
Maybe think about Dick Rothman 35 years ago figured that out, right? He had a layer of primary care docs working with the orthopedic surgeon. So my colleague, for example, Bill Hozak, would see 8 patients a session and book all 8, spend 45 minutes with them. He thought of that 35 years ago.
I'm going to say something that may be a bit provocative, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is that, look, that's going to happen anyway, right? You're going to see primary care groups that are taking risk, payers that are sort of vertically integrating, start to create those ecosystems, start to sort of divert care towards lower cost. And one way to think about this is that as an orthopedic community, you can choose to lead that, or you can choose to receive it, where you become essentially the contract provider for when the patient needs the operation.
Yeah, that is the case. And in fact, if you talk to one of the leaders in that space, Hopco, you'll find out that they are already in contact with primary care groups to get the bundles together and allocate the bundle together. And that's the answer as far as that. Now, we are obviously in a great conference on technology and AI and innovation. So let's bring that into value-based care. Can AI/technology, all the fancy things we've seen here, help value-based care in any way?
Well, by no means am I an expert, but I know some. And, I think the answer is resounding yes, because it will take tasks to take our time. And, one accounting methodology is TDABC, or time-determined activity-based costing. And so when you give back time to providers, you give them value. So certainly that's a motivator for what it may do. It also will help patients. We've already seen that patients have found an AI to be more empathetic to their needs and their questions than a human. So that's coming for sure. And if that's part of your bundle, if you start at that point, you're going to reduce your costs by doing that.
Yeah, I've learned a lot here, Ziv. In the last couple of days, I see incredible opportunity for innovation and technology, especially filling in the gaps in care, right? We see a patient one day, we see him again 3 months later. What happens to them over that 3 months? What are they eating? Are they taking their medications? The whole notion of care coordination and navigation. I think technology is going to accelerate value-based healthcare.
Yeah, I strongly believe that technology will improve value-based healthcare, and it's because you need to be able to collect the data, you need to be able to improve therapy adherence at home, you need to be able to coordinate care better, and that's where data can come in. And when we really want to get really clever with some value-based care models, risk stratifying and triaging the patient early, using machine learning models from patient-reported outcome collection will be extremely innovative that will help the doctor be more successful, deliver different clinical interventions.
Yeah, I think I wholeheartedly agree. I would say it's not sort of an improvement, it's a necessity, just given how fragmented data is. And that's actually one of the tipping points. One of the reasons why we think there's a tipping point now is because there is a much better ability to stitch together data and now to apply machine learning.
So let's be a bit more granular. Okay, everybody agrees that it's good. Now let's talk about specific technologies and how do you think it will help? So let's start with something easy like wearables. How will, one of the challenges I hear from providers about wearables is like, well, I have a lot of data, but who's going to analyze the information? And by the way, who's going to pay me to analyze the information? So I get these tons of wearables, but what do I do with the data? So let's start with that. Who wants to take that one first?
I can try with that. I think the problem with wearables is ease of use and reproducibility and cost versus digital ways of determining joint motion, this sort of thing. But that's going to be solved. And of course, we're going to have implants that are going to be giving information as well. So I think that's going to be a real plus in terms of how we manage our patients. It's not hard to imagine how we can scale telehealth effectively with these approaches, or even have this substitute to some degree, and that AI can monitor or watch over how the patient is recovering in a way that alerts us when there's an outlier. And I think patients will very much like that approach. We already see app-based recovery programs out there, and these are ripe to have this kind of technology embedded into them, to be sort of the watchful eye as the patient recovers.
Excellent.
Yeah, it was funny. My wife went to her PCP the other day and came home with this thing on her chest. I said, "What the hell is that?" She said, "It's a monitor, the new Holter monitor attached to her iPhone." And sure enough, over the last couple of weeks, she would get a call from somebody, you just had an APC, are you having any problem with your blood pressure? I was shocked by that technology. She may have gone to the emergency room, or we just saw it in real use.
Yeah, I think the wearable needs to be affordable. I do think there's some amazing things with computer vision, just using the smartphone, tracking step counts that are affordable. that can be really helpful.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. I think tracking step counts, using a smartphone or using computer vision. I think there are several things that we'll see where technology being able to coordinate and know who's at risk or who's falling off, I would say, falling off the door of, not doing well are going to be some of the things that we'll see.
So now connect that to value-based care?
So I would, you want to start first? Or?
No, the question is
for
you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in order for that to happen in value-based care, you have to, A, have reimbursement models that reimburse for these services, and that's where the remote therapeutic monitoring codes could be there. But then you also have to measure these outcomes, and then you have to tie them together in a value-based care model, an alternative payment model, where you have a benchmark for a number for cost, and you're measuring those quality measures, and if you hit those costs and the savings, then you can be successful in a value-based care model.
Amit?
Yeah, I mean, if that wearable, the stability indicator sort of prevented a fall that prevented your hip fracture patient from going back to the ER, there you go. I mean, you've saved, $5,000, maybe $15,000, right? I think that the key there is like, how do you cut through the noise that wearables always have? And I mean, I think there's two parts to it. One is, who do you deploy it to, right? It's not that there's probably a subsegment of patients where it's really going to sort of make a difference versus not. And the second is, how do you use your technology and your data and machine learning to cut through the noise and sort of, find the patient where it's going to be helpful and find the signal. So I think those two things need to be solved.
I think the really important thing is using that data to make clinical decisions that are actually important.
Yeah.
And so if it's just tracking step counts, if it's just tracking range of motion, and you're not changing the clinical care of what's happening for that patient, then it's useless data.
So I'll give you one simple example that have yet to be integrated, which is one of the challenges, is optimizing patients before surgery. Again, I mean, that area. I think 7 years ago at University of Michigan, they've made a study that showed essentially that if you put a pedometer or something that counts your steps before surgery for 30 days, and you give the patient a target and actually execute it, the post-operative outcome were way better. By the way, they also did CAT scans and showed that if they decrease the amount of fat, it's way better, but that's more complicated. So here's a question. That was 7 years ago. Why don't we implement this? Why is it? It's such a simple thing. 30 days before surgery, put a pedometer on patients, they're wearable. If they walk, they'll do better post-operatively.
Start? I mean, because you didn't make money doing it, right? That's one reason, right? I mean, and well, so look, I mean, I know I said it blithely, but the thing is,
I actually think it's not lightly. I think that that's the reason, by the way.
Because, and again, right, because what happens is that you need to invest, right? To do that, you need a care manager, you need somebody who's going to look at that data, call the patient when they're not doing it, engage with the patient, which is all investment. And unless there is a return on investment, I mean, even with the best intentions, you're not going to do it. And so I'm not speaking solely from a profit motivation here. It's just why you can't justify making that investment. And that's why the business model and the clinical model and the operating model all have to go together.
And that is one of the challenges, is that once you get into a hospital, and now I'm talking as a hospital administrator, the challenge is that it's siloed and the budget of the OR is separate than the budget of the floor. Yeah. And thirdly, the budget of the hospital is from the minute the patient walks in until the minute the patient walks out. They really don't care about anything that will happen outside from a financial perspective. And so you're right. The question is, I'm going to optimize the patient as a surgeon. Okay, I'll do it because it's the right thing to do, but who is going to monitor the patient? Who's actually willing to pay for it? I had challenges in hospitals, because I've implemented these models in multiple hospitals around the country, in convincing hospitals to simply get a CBC test 6 weeks ahead of time. So we know the hemoglobin is 6 weeks ahead of time, so we can intervene, because they said, well, we don't have an authorization yet. We don't know that the patient will go to the OR because the pre-authorization is typically done only 10 days before because they may change an insurance carrier. So we really have a problem with a disjointed payment system. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, just a comment here. You're dead on, and Bob Kaplan wrote about how hospital budgets interfere with innovation because exactly what you said, the money's siloed in different areas and who's the owner. But I think there are opportunities for us to be influencers, particularly if you have somebody motivated who's quality and safety chair or something like that, and they're working with your chief information officer, et cetera. Those kinds of collaborations change structure. And I don't see this happening unless the structural change occurs.
So, Xavier, you brought up the question of who's going to pay for it, right? And I've thought a lot about that. I mean, there are two categories: those who have to, being forced into it; those who have to because they're in an at-risk model like an ACO or a CIN or an advanced primary care group; and then those who see the business opportunity to access that $1 trillion. But there's plenty of money to support the innovation.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm biased, but I helped create these remote therapeutic monitoring codes because there's now good reimbursement models for if you just want to stay in fee-for-service, you can use pedometers, you can use technology and now get reimbursed for it and get bypass the CFO when they're looking at an ROI evaluation. But it's not just that, it's coupling it with value-based care models. But if you have the orthopedic department and innovations and technology where the EMR, and they're not talking, they don't communicate, and they don't coordinate, it makes it really challenging for hospital systems.
So we are at the end of our panel. Before we conclude, anybody wants to say one or two sentences to the audience that you really feel burning need to say?
I'll start. You know, major innovations often start small in scale, so congratulations, you're clearly going to scale this. The key problem for you, I think, is how do you get your message out there? How do you scale your message? Because that will change the way people think. And since some people are early adopters, they may not know what you're doing here, and it's important to reach out to them.
Thank you, Stefano, for putting on this this conference. So again, I'm bullish on the future of healthcare. I think we didn't talk enough about the model that's going to embrace all of this, and I'm a big fan of advanced primary care, technology-enabled advanced primary care, which we as specialists need to fit symbiotically into that relationship. But I'm very excited about the future.
You know, I want to thank Stefano also for having me here, and I truly believe that technology, these new remote therapeutic monitoring codes will be a glide path to some innovative alternative payment models, and that's where I think the future is going to be.
Yeah, I think the panel has said it all. Not much I can add. I think the one thing I'll add on to is the point around sort of investors and the interest in the space. You know, people see that $1 trillion and it creates a ton of opportunity. So for partnerships and you know, as physicians, that sort of support on building capabilities is there.
Great. Thank you so much.
So we are almost at the end of DOCSF this year. The last session probably is going to raise some eyebrows in the audience because it's not related to sensors and AI, robotics. But as Stefano has mentioned during these days, DOCSF is not just that. DOCSF is not working in a silo, not looking what's happening outside. And there is a field that is progressing as fast as probably AI and technologies that we've been discussing these days, and that's regenerative medicine. And eventually, this world will collide. And so here today, please, Lee, join me. Here today, we are presenting three very established researchers and accomplished researchers with novel ideas. With me to moderate this panel is Lee Grossman, CEO of OREF. Lee, you want to say 2 words about yourself? Yeah.
Hello. 2 words about myself. Well, it's an honor to be here. I mean, Stefano and Tad, this is just an incredible conference. I hope that it continues to grow and that you are committed to this over many, many years. And in many ways, I feel fortunate to be up here. I think we've saved perhaps the best for last, even though this whole conference has been a matter of the best being presented. There is certainly a really important piece of technology that can be incorporated into regenerative medicine. It's an important aspect of OREF. At the recent Academy meeting in Vegas, at our major event, our keynote presentation was on regenerative medicine focused around anti-aging and senescent cells. So I'm excited to hear our speakers today, and I'm sure they're going to wow you.
All right, so let's start. Tobias. So here, Tobias Winkler. Can we have the next slide, please? Where is the clicker?
I found it.
Oh, you found it? Okay, perfect. So, Tobias is an orthopedic surgeon at the Center for Musculoskeletal Surgery at the Charité in Berlin, Germany. He's also an accomplished researcher with an interest, obviously, in regenerative medicine. Tobias, it's yours.
Thank you, Fabrizio, for the introduction. I will lead you through the clinical studies that we are doing at the moment in region at the Charité in Berlin, which is my home base. I'm, as said, an orthopedic surgeon, so 50% of my time I spent in the OR, and the rest I'm thinking about my projects and leading these clinical studies. And we also wrap these clinical studies in mechanism of action studies, and this is one very important thing actually that I want to convey here. The first is about muscle regeneration. You can see these 2 videos where we understand actually how people function. If you have a good muscle function, then you have 260% of your body weight in your joints. If you have a bad muscle function, then you have 360% of your body weight in your joint because the coordination doesn't work. And this is only one problem, of course, if you have muscle damages around the hip in this case. These are measurement prostheses of the hip. We started collaborating after a lot of different work with an Israeli biotech company, isolating with a scalability of 20,000 therapeutic units, a placental-derived mesenchymal stromal-like cell that we checked in various approaches actually for their therapeutic effects. These cells are highly anti-inflammatory, immunomodulatory, and they also lead to an anti-apoptosis and myoblast migration. We characterize these cells. They're very similar to MSCs, but do not differentiate. And what we saw was if we inject this in a traumatized muscle, that you can see here, the soleus muscle of a rat. Also, when we inject these cells immediately, we got an increase in contraction force of the muscle. We then went into a phase 1-2 study where we did this after primary hip arthroplasties and saw an increase in force and also a decrease in perioperative stress. This is why we then designed a phase 3 trial. We changed the indication. We went to hip fracture patients because these, of course, have, due to the second hit of the operation after the trauma, also an increased perioperative stress. We implanted arthroplasties there, injected the cells in order to improve mobility in these patients. We received money from the European Union, gathered a large team, and also managed to recruit 240 patients. I wrote there, do you see SARS-CoV-2? Because always when you see a flattening of the curve, that was when a wave hit, and we had to somehow manage this. But we did. What we did not see was a reflection of a force increase in the primary endpoint. And this is a discussion that should be led in our societies. How do we choose our endpoints for our trials? Because this is a very complex one. The short physical performance, battery, standing, balancing, standing up, and walking. And we did not see any change in our cohorts. However, what we saw was that we saw in our insole measurements, so it's a digital conference, we have measurement insoles where we can see the balance of the patients. We saw an earlier weight-bearing symmetry in these patients, which was very interesting after half a year. And if we compare it, compared it to the to our phase 1/2 study in blue, this is the placebo, the y-axis is the abduction strength, we could see an increase in strength over 1 year. So with a significant power. We have 4 kilograms increased weight, not weight, but force, in a 15 kilogram force. So we couldn't translate it, so we are still exploring how what we do with this therapeutic that works, obviously, but we couldn't translate it to our primary endpoint. The second study that I want to present to you is a phase 1/2 study for osteoarthritis, where we make use of things that we know from plasma therapies, which is that a product that is anti-inflammatory will also create a better atmosphere for an osteoarthritic patient. We look a lot into plasma therapies. This is our basic work, actually, or our clinical work. But what we do also in the preclinical evaluation is that we look at different cells and how they contribute to healing in osteoarthritis. CD31 cells, for example, stromal vascular fraction. This is not a cell therapy, as you know, and also our placental-derived cells. We use the Duncan-Hartley model there, which is a model of an idiopathic osteoarthritis. So you do not have to resect any menisci or any cruciate ligaments in order to get this going. So this is very close to the human osteoarthritis. We look at these animals in the MRI and in histology, and what we saw here is that the placental-derived cells do actually conserve the status of the osteoarthritis, which was very interesting to us, actually. They address also the factors that we do want to address in osteoarthritis with the immunomodulation, and they counteract key pathways of osteoarthritis. So, again, we brought together a very renowned community of osteoarthritis researchers. This is based mainly in Europe. In the muscle regeneration, we had also some American sites, and received money from the European Union, and now am just about to start a phase 1/2 trial using these cells in osteoarthritis. Of course, we also have functional gait analysis with this, and a lot of biomarker analysis that we do, as we do in all our studies, because we want to really go into the mechanism of action there. This is also a digital application that we test there, because we know, to studies based on studies from Georg Duda and Nick Brisson, that after ACL reconstruction, we can exhibit a pathological movement pattern that in the end leads to osteoarthritis. And we can, with this, it's called Reflex Help. It's a Romanian-German company with this sensor-based rehabilitation program. We can reprogram actually the patients in a way that these pathological movement patterns are corrected. So this is also embedded in the Osteoarthritis Consortium Proto. These are the cooperators there. What we also do is we look in bone regeneration. I do not need to tell you, a lot of you are orthopedic surgeons, that humeral head fractures are a big problem actually. They are a fracture of the elderly. We use these angle stable plates. You will use maybe other plates, but it's basically the same systems for fixing them, but the outcome is a disaster. So also in our cohorts, we have up to 30% loss of reduction and also screw cutouts. So it's not all of these patients are reoperated, but this is a huge problem actually due to the bad bone quality. We at the Charité have a lot of pre-work, of preclinical work done on bone healing. This is actually an expertise of the Julius Wolf Institute, where I'm also working. And Kate Schmidt-Blake found that iloprost, that's a prostacyclin analogon, can, by a shift of the immunomodulation, it does a lot of good stuff actually. It shifts the CD8, CD4 ratio, the M1, M2 ratio via a CAMP rise. We can thereby increase the fracture healing. We found that this is very beneficial in the animal and started a phase 1/2 trial where we used this repurposing drug that we apply via catheter, as can be seen here, to heal the fractures better. The problem is this: we have a lot of exclusion criteria. We have screened now 280 patients, and we included today the 10th. Okay, so you can imagine. We had a hard fight with the regulatory bodies here because they do not want to do, actually they want to be very cautious, and this is a problem of recruitment then. We look at radiological clinical endpoints of healing. We also do a lot of biomarker studies there that explain to us how this therapy works. This is the same approach that we do in all our clinical studies. So we bounce it back to animals, we bounce it back to the lab to see why we find then an effect or not. The last slides, I want to show you a foundation that we just established. It's the Alliance for Advanced Therapies in Orthopedics. Why did we do that? Because we wanted to actually, these are a group of people that with whom we met last year already. This year it will be in 2 weeks, the conference. What we want to do is we want to bring quality in the field of regenerative medicine and of advanced therapies. We do this for the musculoskeletal field. It's a big field, as you know, we heard it a lot. And you said it, Fabrizio, the advanced therapies are rising. They are through the roof. Everybody seems to be doing advanced therapies. But the quality is something that we really have to explore and we really have to warrant for our patients. And this is something that we really try to push with our foundation. So with this, I want to thank you for your attention. I'm through with my talk. I wanted to give you a picture of what kind of clinical studies we make, and as I said, which kind of accompanying studies we do, because only to do a clinical study and have an endpoint brings you nothing. You also need to understand why something works or why it doesn't work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Stay with us. Okay. Now, Maddalena Adorno. Hi. So she's a co-founder and CEO of Dorian Therapeutics. She completed her Ph.D. at Stanford, studying stem cells and aging biology. She holds several awards and patents, founded 2 companies, and sits on the advisory boards of several others. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, thank you. And thank you for having me here. Most of you have spent a lifetime working on knee biology, and I spent the last 2.5 years working on this. So I'm also looking forward to hear your feedback. But yeah, I moved from Italy to Stanford in 2008, studying stem cell biology. And my studies in stem cell biology ended up being studies in aging biology. And that brought me 10 years later in starting a company, Dorian Therapeutics, to actually bring this to the clinic. So I'm very committed to the entire bench side to bedside process. I'm halfway there, so 10 years have passed since the beginning of the process. There's still a lot of road ahead of me. So I want to start just with a brief introduction about how we think about aging biology. So there are 2 main events that happen during aging. So from one side, stem cells that are supposed to regenerate a tissue, they decrease in number and function. And on the other side, we start having an accumulation of what they are called senescent cells. Senescent cells are a form of zombie cells that actually don't die and accumulate in aged or diseased tissues. And these zombie cells, they are actually responsible for secreting factors that poison the entire tissue and for actually compromising the functionality of the tissue. The other thing that I want to point out is that when I talk about aging, I don't necessarily talk about old people. When there is a disease, we have localized aging in that tissue. And so, for example, even if we talk about post-traumatic osteoarthritis, we are talking about aging of the joint. And this, for us, is very interesting and very important to remember. So if we look at the other approaches in the aging space, a lot of people have been focusing on stem cell and how to provide stem cell in a tissue to accelerate the regeneration, or senescence. How can I kill the zombie cells? So Unity is, for example, a company that started just to move this forward and to kill senescent cells. They also failed a clinical trial in osteoarthritis a few years back. So for the past 10 years, we have been preaching another point of view, that the two events, the senescence accumulation and the stem cell, are related one to the other. So to really have a clinical benefit, we need to look at things that are at the key of both processes. And actually, a few weeks back, also a paper came out in humans showing that when stem cells go down in humans, senescence accumulates. So the two things go together. So you will hear this concept of xenoblockers. Xenoblockers are the kind of therapy we are developing at Dorian, and we want to be at the intersection between senescence and stem cell biology. Osteoarthritis, for us, it's a disease that shows exactly this kind of sign of aging. So first of all, there is an increase in the number of senescent cells in the knee joint. And actually, the amount of senescent cells correlates with the severity of the disease. And on the other side, there are less stem cell and less functional stem cell. So SOX9, it's a marker for mesenchymal stem cell, and it goes down in OA patients. They also run epigenetic clock. So when we look at the epigenetic clock, we don't look at the chronological age of a tissue. So if a person is 30 years old, the chronological age is 30 years old. But the biological clock, how old are the tissue? And if you look at the knee of people with osteoarthritis, on average, you have 4 years of accelerated aging. Think about this also in terms of patient stratification that you can achieve by looking at epigenetic aging. So can we treat osteoarthritis with xenoblockers? So my story started from research that we conducted at Stanford on people with Down syndrome. People with Down syndrome, they show signs of accelerated aging. So they have early onset Alzheimer in their 40s and 50s. They have osteoporosis, metabolic syndrome, hair loss, skin aging, et cetera, et cetera. And also from a cellular point of view, they show increased senescence and reduced stem cell activity. In this case, on average, people with Down syndrome, they show 15 years of increased epigenetic aging. So really profound phenotype. So why is that? We identified on chromosome 21 a single gene, USP16, that is actually responsible for this accelerated aging. Of course, Down syndrome is more than aging. There are other things that are not rescued by this single gene. But when we are talking about the tissue aging, this single gene is mostly responsible for all of this. And it's a deubiquitination enzyme. That it means that it regulates the chromatin opening and closing. So as you know, our DNA remains the same, our epigenetic changes during time, and USP16 is one of the genes responsible of the epigenetic changes. So when we are young and healthy, there are low level of USP16, the chromatin is closed, and the programs of aging are not accessible. When we get old or during a disease, higher level of USP16 activates these programs of aging and inflammation. So with the USP16 inhibitors, we can reverse this process and go back to a younger tissue. So USP16 happens to actually be elevated in people with osteoarthritis. And a study published by the Biobank a few years ago in osteoarthritic patients actually shows that there are 3 main SNPs that are involved in osteoarthritis, and one of these 3 SNPs actually maps 3 kilobases upstream of the USP16. So this is something that we are still investigating, but actually that SNP may be related to USP16 as well. So what happens if we block USP16? And one important cell type that we see in osteoarthritis are actually the chondrocytes. So we looked at human chondrocytes from healthy patients and osteoarthritic patients. If we block USP16 in healthy chondrocyte, nothing happens. There's no a huge change in the expression profile. But if we block USP16 in osteoarthritic patients, in osteoarthritic chondrocytes, now they look like healthy chondrocytes. So we are remodeling their epigenome in a way that changes a complete change in their transcription profile. So one epigenetic marker, like I was talking about, a histone ubiquitination changes and goes back to normal level of histone ubiquitination, and the senescence also goes back to normal. So very interesting data. From the other side, what we are doing is that we are not reintroducing stem cell in the knee joint, but we are activating the stem cells that are already there. So if you see what's the effect of mesenchymal stem cell when you block USP16, is that now SOX9, that is a marker of stemness, increases, and we have more efficient production of chondrocytes and more deposition of cartilage. That you can imagine that in a clinical context, these metrics actually matters. We move to in vivo studies in MMT, surgery-induced model of OA. So it's a medial meniscal tear that we induce in rats. And we initially use an AAV for the local delivery of RNA interference against USP16. As you know, AAV are also used in the clinic, in several clinical trials, so that's also a therapeutic opportunity. What we see is we measure mechanical odynia, so we can measure the pain threshold in these animals. And after MMT surgery, of course, the pain threshold drops dramatically. That's the red line. But if we block USP16, in 2 weeks, we go back to completely normal pain level. And this is accompanied by a strong cartilage improvement. So we have cartilage improvement, we have less inflammation, and we have a reduction in pain. Again, more data on this. This is what happens that make us think that USP16 inhibition can be really key as a disease-modifying treatment. And we see that in the cartilage, 4 weeks after treatment, we have a better histopathology score, we have a lower level of VEGF in the synovial fluid, and more matrix deposition. So what we did at Dorian Therapeutics in the past 4 years, we developed a small molecule for USP16. And besides program in osteoarthritis, we are actually tackling a number of other diseases, because since we are tackling the basic mechanism of aging, we have application in lupus nephritis, AKI, and a number of other diseases that we are testing. But in osteoarthritis, what we did is to do local injection of DT201, that is our lead compounds, in the knee joint in the same MMT model. And what we see is that, again, we have an improvement in pain and an improvement in the histology. So again, I was mentioning that we are maybe halfway in the path to bringing this to the clinic. We are planning a clinical trial for 2025 in OA patients, and we are now working on a slow release formulation of our drug. I think that what's really key for us is that we don't see only cartilage effect and we don't see only pain. We see the two things combined together, and this is what patients need at this point. So when we think about our clinical trial, also the advantage that we have thinking about this in terms of aging is that we can stratify patients based on blood biomarkers that are relevant in the aging context. So I show you the example of the epigenetic clock. There are other markers that can be used for this. So we are setting up a preliminary study in patients to validate these markers. And when it comes to our first clinical trial, will take into account patients that are already undergoing total knee replacement, and we will do our injection before total knee replacement, and this will give us access to the biological material to test if really we are rejuvenating the joint. We are a small company based in San Carlos, so we are a team of 10 people. We got support from NIH. We got a $4 million grant from NIH, and we have a number of investors and partners that are working with us to move this program forward. And thank you for having me here and to listen to this story that it's a bit different from what you heard these days. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a seat. Thank you. All right, our last speaker, Denis Evsenko. Denis Evsenko is a professor and vice chair for research at the University of California, of Southern California, sorry. Almost was saying University of California, Los Angeles. But his research focuses on the development of therapeutics for the prevention of osteoarthritis and restoration of damaged cartilage. He's the co-founder of Cartronics, BlueCart, and Reparis, focus on the development of product for human tissue regeneration. Thank you, Denis.
Well, thank you, Fabrizio, and I would also like to thank the organizers for having us here, because obviously it's a little bit of a stretch for all of you, some kind of tour de force in biotechnology. So I will show you some data, and I think it was great to have you speaking before me, because a lot of these concepts, I think, are overlapping here between these two stories, and I don't need to do some additional introductions. So I would like to show you my disclosures and also show that the story that I'm presenting today has just been published a few weeks ago in Science Translational Medicine. So obviously I'm showing you all only a very small portion of the study. If you are interested in this topic, you can read it. And also, this is the press release. This is Dr. Jay Lieberman, the chairman of orthopedic surgery at USC, who will be running this clinical trial very shortly. Well, as you just heard, that osteoarthritis is really a disease of aging, and in most patients, maybe 10% is post-traumatic or genetic with obvious, established mechanisms, but in most patients it's idiopathic, and you can see that the incidence of osteoarthritis is dramatically increasing with age, can affect pretty much any joint. And for a long time, companies were trying to target proteolytic enzymes, some other mechanisms without success, major success, a lot of high-profile failures in the space, and I think we all agree that we need a completely different view on this disease. We need a lot of innovation, and we need to challenge the existing dogmas. And what I want to show you today is a completely new view on inflammation. So Tobias, sorry, I will not be saying that inflammation is necessarily bad today. I want to show a little bit different view on it, because inflammation can be bad, but it's also one of the major triggers of tissue regeneration, that if we can control it, we may be able to achieve much better outcomes clinically. For a long time, we've been thinking what actually correlates between osteoarthritis and aging, because as I mentioned, it's an aging disease. And one of the molecules that, among others, that went on our radar was a cytokine called interleukin-6. If you look at it, interleukin-6, it's very important also for rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune diseases, but it's one of the key cytokines that is usually always detected at the elevated levels in osteoarthritis patients, in most of them. And very interestingly, if you look at the normal healthy people who don't have obvious diseases, and if you look at the level of IL-6 in their systemic plasma circulation, you will notice, and this is the graph in the middle, that it very closely correlates with aging. So it elevates in the plasma with aging, even in healthy people. So we actually decided to look at it a little bit more deeper, because obviously IL-6 is one of the key drivers of C-reactive protein, the clinical biomarker in inflammation commonly used in clinic, because IL-6 directly stimulates C-reactive protein production by the liver. So we started to explore this link a little bit further and trying to understand, well, does the mechanism of action of IL-6 in osteoarthritis is the same as in the rheumatic diseases. And, you know, what I want to tell you that those cytokines, you often see papers and studies where people look at them in black and white color. So they say, well, they're pro-inflammatory cytokines, they induce inflammation, they're negative players. And you see a long list of them, 10, 15, 20, that are all listed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, many of them as an indicator of inflammation. And this is true, because in evolution, the system appeared to protect us from bacteria and viruses, and mammals acquired a phenomenal defense systems in the immune system, in the immune responses. And interleukin-6 is initially designed to be produced from damaged to injured cell, usually infected by microbes or by other stimuli, to attract immune cells and eliminate and localize the problem. And as Madalena told us, you know, in senescence and aging, factors like IL-6, because it's one of the key, actually, senescence-associated secreted factors, they are building everywhere in our tissues. And that actually makes our immune system completely disoriented. That's why we call it a dark side of this adaptive immune mechanism, because our immune system recognizes these fragments of dying cells, such as pieces of DNA or proteins, as maybe as an infection. But it's not an infection. It's part of the aging phenotype. And that's why we develop this low-grade inflammation, which sometimes is referred to as inflammaging, as inflammation of aging, which is a slow-grade aseptic inflammation. And interleukin-6 cytokines are indeed a big players in this field. And it's not just interleukin-6. It's multiple cytokines that I show here in the same family that are combined under this family called IL-6 cytokines. IL-6 is a prototypic member, but there are multiple ones. And they all signal through unique receptors, which all heterodimerize and then transmit the signal inside the cell via one shared co-receptor called GP130. That is a key fraction of the signaling cascade that I'll be focusing today. So, and canonically, especially in the field of rheumatology, this system was primarily studied in the context of a transcription factor called STAT3, and a lot of actually drugs were developed in the space. For example, JAK-STAT inhibitors, they are clinically approved for rheumatoid arthritis, right? And this is a canonical signaling mechanism that people always refer to as a inflammatory signaling mechanism driven by IL-6. So we thought, well, maybe with aging this mechanism is activated. And we looked at a lot of literature in the space, and this is true that interleukin-6 cytokines drive a lot of damaging responses, right, in different tissues, including induction of senescence, osteoarthritis, fibrosis, cognitive decline in the brain, etc. But what we noticed is that most of these responses are not really mediated by STAT3 mechanism, which was very interesting. Well, further, we realized that there's a lot of literature suggesting that interleukin-6 induced inflammation can actually induce regeneration, not in one organ, but in multiple tissues, such as organs like the liver. As you know, the liver can regenerate after resection, and this mechanism is actually mediated via inflammation triggered by interleukin-6 STAT3 mechanism. And it's also true for muscle, for other tissues. Moreover, if you look at stem cells, this STAT3, GP130 STAT3 signaling mechanism is critically important for the maintenance of stem cells. So we really wanted to challenge this existing view that interleukin-6, GP130 STAT3 is the driver of inflammation, and we wanted to look at it as a potential regeneration-promoted signal activated by the immune system. When you look at the osteoarthritis patients, this is absolutely true. The STAT3 signaling, IL-6 signaling is dramatically activated in osteoarthritic patients. And for a long time, people thought it's an indication of damage and inflammation. But there were no direct studies to address what is the meaning of this activation. What if it's a potentially intrinsic response of the cells attempting to actually regenerate? Because in adult joints, as you know, there is no stem cells in the adult joint. When you look at the, we decided to go back at the very earliest stage where a lot of stem cells are present in the joint, and you see a huge increase in proliferation of articular chondrocytes that never happens in adult. And we actually realized that if we look at this developing joint from the canonical perspective, we would say it's highly inflamed. This is a 12-week human joint, and you can see that activation of pro-inflammatory IL-6 mechanism is highly active there, but this is not an inflammation. This is normal development. Therefore, and these cells are proliferating, they're behaving as progenitors and they're growing. So this is the ideal cell type that we would want to have for adult regeneration if we would have it. But look at the signaling. You can see down there, this big black strips indicates the level of activation of this pathway. It's very high in the fetus, it's very low in adult. So what we did then, we deleted these particular genes, GP130 and STAT3 in neonatal mice, just try to see what will happen, because if they drive inflammation, we will see some good outcomes, but we saw the opposite. We actually lost stem and progenitor cells in the growth plates and partially in articular cartilage, but mainly in the growth plates. You can see premature closure, indicating that this pathway is actually essential for the maintenance of progenitors. And when we overexpress it, we didn't see any symptoms of arthritis. In contrast to that, we genetically overexpressed it in mice. We saw cartilage to start proliferating, and you can see dramatic expansion of the growth plate and significant proliferation of articular chondrocytes in adult. So it's still in mice. But it actually challenges this dogma that cartilage in adult is completely inert cell type. It can actually respond to some stimuli, and inflammation may be a trigger of regeneration if it's well controlled. The problem is also we deleted STAT3 and showed that arthritis gets worse, and we ended up with this profile, basically showing that, in fact, often interleukin-6 induced inflammation in the joint is very similar to the program that is activated during normal development. However, there's also a lot of negative things, and we obviously know that interleukin-6 can destroy cartilage and destroy the joint, among other cytokines. So we decided to look if there's any other signaling domains and pathways, in addition to the one that we dismissed as the main driver that can cause this disease-associated phenotype. And to do that, we conducted a screen with multiple blockers, and we just looked at cartilage breakdown with different pathway inhibitors. And one of the inhibitors that went in our radar was an inhibitor against SRC kinase. SRC kinase are canonically known as a major drivers of inflammation and tissue destruction, and they are often activated by mechanisms such as, for example, infection. So this is an ideal candidate potentially for the negative portion of the signaling balance downstream of GP130, because we dismissed STAT3 as the main driver. So we decided to look, because there were no direct literature, if this receptor, interleukin-6 receptor, can also recruit SRC kinases and initiate this destructive signaling pathway. So we actually, and I'll just skip that, I'll just show you that we took a genetic portion, the portion of this receptor, mutated one by one all the signaling domains in it, and we identified a signaling tyrosine 814, in this receptor that specifically recruits SRC kinases, which is a completely new mechanism of action. And we demonstrated, we made a mouse that lacked this particular tyrosine, and what was really amazing, that this mouse had selective inhibition of only SRC signaling domain, but not STAT3 signaling domain. And I'll explain you why it's really important. After that, and I promised Fabrizio that I'll mention the word sensor 2 times today to make sure I fit into this digital conference. So we realized that this mutant mouse has lost a very important sensor of inflammation, the negative arm of inflammation, because I keep telling you that inflammation can be not only bad, but it can be also regenerative. So the bad arm of inflammation can be actually genetically eliminated, and you can see that chondrocytes from this mouse was not, and synovial fibroblasts as well, were not responding to the IL-6 cytokine, and also they're not driving all these negative regulators such as catabolic enzymes and other genes that drive destruction. Moreover, we showed that this mutant mouse, the cartilage from this mouse, was completely resistant to inflammatory-induced signals. It was not really destroyed, as marked by collagen II and aggrecan neoepitopes showing the destruction. So after that, we exposed it to osteoarthritis, and we showed that this mouse was really resistant to osteoarthritic progression. So that led us to this new concept that we been working on for quite a long time. In 2018, we discovered this new class of regulatory molecules, small molecules, that can actually control GP130 signaling, this receptor. And the main concept here is that they can selectively eliminate signaling modules. So not working as on-off switches, but can selectively eliminate signaling modules of this receptor. And as I told you, the GP130-814 module that promotes damage can be selectively eliminated, as we showed. And we decided to rescreen this library and choose molecules that will selectively inhibit this tyrosine without touching the good or pro-regenerative module of GP130 receptor. And we found several molecules of which one was advanced further. So you can see here, this is a schematics of the signaling domain. It's a summary showing you that basically we can selectively switch off some arms of this receptor without touching this pro-regenerative arm induced by the inflammatory reaction. So after that, we took the lead molecule, and this is Dr. Marc from Canada, from Guelph, who ran the study, and we took the lead candidate, we used a canine model of osteoarthritis. It's a meniscal release model, and it was a double-blinded study run by Marc. So we used 3 different concentrations of the drug, double-blinded study, and I'm showing you the results. So you can see that the highest dose of the molecule, so it was injected in the knee, caused dramatic protection of articular cartilage compared to control. And also osteophyte formations were significantly reduced. When we looked at pain score as well, Colorado pain score and lameness, and this is a very sophisticated method for detection of pain, we also saw dose-dependent changes, suggesting that this treatment was actually reducing pain, and it's very important for the clinical trials. Well, also we have done some molecular studies to show changes in the cell biology of this tissue. So, I mean, what I want to conclude here is that the new concept here is that inflammation is not necessarily a bad thing. That often chronic diseases such as osteoarthritis is a balance, it's a combination of regeneration-inducing signals, and inflammation is one of the strongest triggers of regeneration in our body. But also we have the same receptors driving some disease-promoting outcomes and tissue destruction. So what we showed is that they can be actually uncoupled pharmacologically, that you can let the regenerative arm, this program that represents fetal-like attempt to regenerate the joint going, and you can selectively block signaling that induces tissue destruction. And that changes the view on this receptor because as many of these big receptors, it's not an on-off switch. It's not a simple regulator that you can target and eliminate, because anything that will block the signaling and block inflammation will not only block tissue destruction, but will also block this pro-regenerative arm of inflammation that we show can be also initiated by interleukin-6 signaling. And that's why we think treatments like, for example, tocilizumab, some anti-IL-6 treatments that are clinically approved, they were not efficient and causing some side effects because they were blocking both of these arms. And at the moment, the study was very well supported by the Department of Defense. So we received a large grant to move it forward in collaboration with the startup company Carthronics, and also Pacira Biosciences, who invested in this development. And this trial will start hopefully this year, or early 2024, with primary objective, obviously, safety. And the secondary objective is potentially preliminary efficacy. We plan to involve artificial intelligence in this trial. And I think with that, I just want to conclude that this is an attempt to harness regenerative power of inflammation. So it's a completely new view on the system. And if we can reproduce even partially what we saw in the large animal studies, I think it can be a pretty successful story. And that's the laboratory that actually did this all work. And I'm happy to answer the questions and tell you more about the clinical trial in the discussion section.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Stay with us. All right, so we have, I know, but just one question. You want to go? Yeah,
sure, I'll ask a question. I want to acknowledge something Stefano said in his opening remarks yesterday that I thought was very profound, where he introduced the notion of mobility is the most important aspect of global healthcare. And here we have three presenters that are talking, that are presenting science that can make a significant impact on these chronic health conditions related to MSK. So my question, it's kind of a three-part question, is what is your timeline for getting this to clinical practice, and what do you need to get to the next steps, and what is the next step?
Dennis, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the claims you are making, because disease modification is a very difficult claim to make with the FDA, and often they require things like the number of total joint replacements after this treatment. So you need to watch these patients for many years to wait until they really go into joint replacement surgeries, and then you show FDA that, your treatment improved that. If you're just making claims that are not as serious, then the timeline can be much shorter. So we have a major pharma company, Pacira Biosciences, involved in this development. So the trial starts now. The first phase 1/2A will go for 2 years. I think the realistic timeline of having it actually in the market is 5 years, if we don't make disease modification claim.
Right. Madeleine?
Whatever he said, plus 18 to 24 months. That's the clinical path a bit. It's a standard. For us, it's very important to actually make disease-modifying claims, because that's what we want to do. Okay. And again, in parallel, we are also developing the systemic approach that could also be interesting in other kind of osteoarthritis potentially. But in the next year, we want to run a study in patients where we try to see if we can use actually aging biomarkers to stratify the population. And I think for the entire field, that could be very interesting data to see.
Too bad.
Let me tell you the numbers of years for the muscle study, which we had from preclinics to clinics. These were 16 years.
Oh, boy.
And now we have a phase 3 data that shows that the muscle is increasing in force, but it didn't translate to the chosen endpoint. And this shows you the problems. And this shows you also the opportunities that lie in virtual twins, for example, that lie in silico trials, in modulation. And this is why I think you're absolutely right when you say these worlds will, if not collide, I hope they won't collide, I hope they will fuse, because we need these tools to improve and speed up our findings.
Thank you. I'm mindful of the time, and I have gazillions more questions, but we need to wrap it up. So thank you guys very much, and Stefano.
This panel together, I was always amazed but amazing. You guys get down to molecule level discussions and arguments about which molecule is there. It's remarkable. But thank you all three for coming and sharing your incredible expertise with us. Thank you. Dr. Vail? Yeah, so we did it. We came to the end of DOCSF 2023, and we have one announcement to make still, which is the winners of the bone tank. And if it wasn't clear at the time, they all were winners. All 6 of them will be able to move on to the quarterfinals of the Health Hub Digital Health Awards, which puts them in front of, I think, 1,200 venture capital groups that will have access to their profiles and review them, which is a huge, huge thing for them because it's always very hard to get in front of these folks. Tad, we're at the end. What thoughts do you have?
Yeah, really exciting for them to carry that work on and get it in front of more people. And I think that's one of the fundamental goals of this meeting is to get thoughts out to more people. Just what strikes me after learning a lot today and hearing from incredible expertise is now the thinking really starts. Going back to what Mohan said about innovative thinking, we take what we learned, then we try to predict where this is going. We heard about the AI and the rules of AI, that there are no rules.
Right.
So what does that mean? Now the real work starts for each of us as we assimilate this and think, okay, well, how are we going to react to that in our own niche and our own interest? What does that mean? And we heard how this is going to apply in virtually every section that we heard from today. It's going to impact that. Likewise with value-based care, we heard some of the rules, we heard some of the reactions, we heard some of the trends. Where is it going? I think what I found today was more information, the context with which to make decisions. So very worthwhile, very invigorating, and now the real work starts.
Now the real work starts. We've all been inundated with ideas and thoughts, and that is the purpose. The purpose is to get us to connect dots and to move beyond the known into the unknown with some strength of knowledge that will help us get there. I would love to have a few people come up and join us on stage, Tad, which are the folks that have made this all possible. So you can visualize and see them and clap them. So Scott, you manage all our partnerships. Thank you so much. Come on up here. Blaine, come on up. Blaine helped us with the bone tank and that whole session. Fabrizio, of course, coming up. And Mike asked, Mike and I were at Fenway, I think it was, sitting having a cocktail at an event, and I said, and he clearly knew so much about the AC space, and like, would you mind? I know how busy you are, help me out with this. And he did, and he delivered in spades. And Christina, do you want to drop up here for a second? And Cheryl, will you have can you leave the computer and join us for a second? Would love to thank you. Is that a no? Oh gosh, come on up. Yeah. So as we leave here with thoughts, confusion, wondering what somebody said, wishing you could hear it again, the answer is you can hear it again. Cheryl, come on up. We need to thank you enough. She's been with us for 5 years now with DOCSF, I think it's about right, and recording and capturing all this information, making it accessible to us. We had some little snafus with the slides, and for those of you who are speaking, she's already fixed that problem in post-processing, so it's incredible. Come on in close, everybody. Can somebody take a picture for me? It's an amazing team. Thank you so much. Great, give them a big round of applause. Thank you. And to the AV team in the back, Doug, thank you so much for your team. You guys have been great. We've definitely gone through an amazing time. We had great sound, music, everything was great. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Stefano.
Yes, thank you.